Once upon a time, in a small town surrounded by dark woods and winding roads, there was a bridge that everyone whispered about. They said it was haunted, that it stretched on forever, and that if you crossed it at night, you might never come back. But one rainy evening, a man named Tom was running late. He had to get home, and the bridge seemed like the quickest way. Ignoring the warnings, he drove onto the bridge, thinking it would be just a short trip. As Tom drove, the rain poured down, and the wind howled outside. The bridge was long and dark, with only his headlights cutting through the night. But as he drove, something strange began to happen. The scenery around him never changed. He saw the same trees, the same shadows, and the same dark water below, no matter how fast he went. It was as if he was stuck in a loop, trapped in a place that didn't want to let him go. As the minutes turned into hours, Tom's heart raced. He could feel a sense of desperation creeping in. The air grew thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the sound of his tires on the wet pavement. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard, but the time never seemed to change. He was lost in a liminal space, and he could feel something watching him from the darkness. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise behind him, like whispers carried by the wind. Tom's breath quickened as he glanced in the rearview mirror, but all he saw was darkness. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, and he felt an icy chill run down his spine. He pressed down on the gas pedal, desperate to escape whatever was lurking in the night. But no matter how fast he drove, the bridge continued to stretch on, endlessly. Tom's mind raced with thoughts of what could be chasing him. Was it the ghosts of those who had crossed the bridge before him? Or something even more sinister? He remembered the stories he had heard as a child about the bridge. How people had vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind but their cars. Panic set in as he realized he might be next. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a storm. He could almost make out words, but they were too faint to understand. Just as he thought he might lose his mind, he saw a flicker of light in the distance. Hope surged within him. Maybe there was an end to this nightmare after all. He pressed harder on the gas, racing toward the light. But as he got closer, the light flickered and vanished, leaving him in total darkness once more. Despair washed over him. The bridge was a trap, and he was its prisoner. He slammed his hands on the steering wheel, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. The whispers turned into laughter, echoing in his ears. He wanted to scream, to shout, but the sound caught in his throat. Tom tried to remember the stories he had heard. There had to be a way to escape this endless journey. He thought about turning back, but the thought of what might be behind him filled him with dread. He felt like he was running from something terrible, something that wanted to drag him into the shadows. With a deep breath, Tom decided to take a different approach. He slowed down, trying to focus on the road ahead instead of the darkness around him. Maybe if he took his time, he could figure out a way to break free. He rolled down his window, letting the cold night air rush in, hoping it would clear his mind. But as the wind howled through the car, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice, soft and eerie, calling his name. Tom! He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice was sweet, but filled with malice. It was as if the bridge itself was alive, taunting him. He looked around, desperate to find the source, but there was nothing but darkness. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He had to keep moving. As he drove on, the shadows seemed to shift and dance around him. He could feel eyes watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. The laughter echoed again, louder this time, and he could almost feel fingers brushing against his skin. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to block out the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. Then, just as he thought he might lose his mind, he spotted something in the distance, a figure standing by the side of the road. Relief washed over him. Maybe this person could help him escape. He slowed down, squinting to see better. But as he got closer, his stomach dropped. The figure was a shadowy silhouette, its features indistinct, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "Help me," it whispered, its voice echoing like a distant memory. Tom felt a chill run through him. He knew he shouldn't stop, but something about the figure drew him in. He rolled down his window slightly, trying to hear better. "Please, help," It pleaded again, but the voice was laced with something dark, something that sent a shiver down his spine. Tom shook his head, refusing to be lured in. He stepped on the gas, speeding past the figure as it reached out a hand, its fingers stretching toward him. The laughter returned, louder and more mocking than before. Tom couldn't take it anymore. He had to find a way out. He remembered the stories. There were tales of people who had found a way to break the curse of the bridge. He needed to focus. He needed to find the answer before it was too late. Suddenly, he spotted a sign up ahead. It was old and faded, but he could make out the words, "Turn back. The bridge is a trap." His heart raced. This was what he needed. He had to find a way to turn around and escape this nightmare. He slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. But as he turned the car around, the shadows closed in, blocking his path. The whispers grew louder, drowning out his thoughts. "You can't leave," they hissed. "You belong to us now." Panic surged through him as he realized he was surrounded. Tom's mind raced as he searched for a way out. He remembered the stories of those who had crossed the bridge and how they had to confront their fears to escape. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He had to face whatever was chasing him. He had to fight back. With renewed determination, he shouted into the darkness, "I won't let you take me." The laughter stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, he felt a sense of power, as if the shadows were afraid of him. But then, the whispers returned, more insistent than ever. "Turn back, Tom. You're one of us now." He could feel the darkness closing in, the air thick with despair. But he refused to give in. He turned his headlights toward the shadows, illuminating the figures that surrounded him. They were twisted, ghostly shapes, their faces contorted in pain and anger. But Tom stood his ground, refusing to let fear take over. "I'm not afraid of you," he shouted, his voice echoing through the night. The figures recoiled, their laughter fading into the distance. He could feel the power of his words pushing back against the darkness. He had to keep fighting. As he pressed on, the bridge began to tremble beneath him, the shadows shifting and swirling like a storm. He could see the end of the bridge in the distance, a faint light shining through the darkness. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, urging the car forward. With every ounce of strength, he pressed down on the gas, racing toward the light. The figures screamed, their voices rising in a chorus of rage and despair. But Tom didn't look back. He focused on the light, the promise of freedom. Finally, he burst through the darkness, the car flying into the light. He felt a rush of air as the shadows fell away, and he was free. The bridge behind him vanished, swallowed by the night. Tom let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, tears streaming down his face. He had escaped, but as he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the bridge was still out there, waiting for its next victim. And deep down, he knew that the darkness would always be watching, ready to call him back into its depths. The journey was over, but the nightmare had only just begun. As Tom drove away, relief washed over him. The hum of the engine matched the rapid beat of his heart, but that sense of freedom slowly faded. He couldn't shake the image of the bridge behind him, its darkness looming like a shadow in the recesses of his mind. He looked at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the glowing eyes of the figure he'd passed, but all he saw was faint light pooling in the distance. His hands trembled as he tightened his grip on the wheel. Soon, the roads twisted through thick trees that suffocated any remaining warmth. The rain had stopped, but a heavy mist rolled in, wrapping around him like a cold embrace. Every rustle of leaves felt like whispers, secrets that the woods wanted to keep locked away. Tom turned on the radio, hoping to drown out the unsettling silence. The static crackled, then suddenly cut to an old radio show, its voice eerie and grainy. The host spoke in hushed tones, recounting stories of the bridge, tales of missing persons, and how those who had crossed it were never seen again. "They become part of the woodlands," the voice said, chilling him to the bone. A knot formed in his stomach. It was as if the host knew him, leading him back to that dark place. He turned the dial, trying to find anything else, but every station was filled with the same ghostly voice. The stories became more personal, details about visitors who had never returned home. Each name hung in the air like a warning. "Tom, you're next," it seemed to whisper. Just as desperation started creeping in, he saw something up ahead. A flicker of light caught his attention between the trees. Was it hope or more danger? His heart raced as he slowed down, peering through the fog. What appeared to be an old house stood off the road, its windows dark, but there was a warm glow flickering inside, like a candle desperately fighting off the night. His instinct screamed at him to keep driving, to escape whatever might lie ahead. But curiosity pulled him closer. He pulled into the gravel driveway, the crunch of the stones echoing through the stillness. As he got out, the air turned frigid, biting at his skin, a shiver racing down his spine as he approached the door. The door creaked open, seemingly on its own, revealing a dim hallway adorned with dusty frames and artifacts of a forgotten life. "Hello," he called out, his voice shaky, swallowed by the silence. No response came, just the faint flickering light beckoning him further inside. He took a tentative step, the floorboards groaning beneath him, echoing like the whispers that followed him. He moved deeper into the house, the flickering light spilling from a room at the end of the corridor. As he drew closer, the shadows seemed to retract, swirling around each corner, whispering his name with a haunting familiarity. "Tom," they murmured, and he felt a wave of cold wash over him, goosebumps prickling his skin. Pushing open the door, he found a small parlor filled with dusty furniture and broken shelves. In the center stood an old fireplace with the flickering light coming from a single candle, melting slowly as if it had been burning for years. Around the room were photographs, their faces blurred and faded, but something felt unsettlingly familiar about them. Tom squinted, trying to focus on one photograph that caught his eye. The face looked just like his, same features, same sharp jawline. He stumbled back, horrified confusion gripping him. "No, it can't be," he muttered. But the deeper he looked, the more faces appeared, each hauntingly similar to his own, blended with the features of others who appeared to be trapped in time. The walls felt like they were closing in, and an overwhelming sense of despair washed over him. The laughter returned, louder now, echoing off the walls. "You're home, Tom," they taunted, voices overlapping, growing nearer. His breath quickened as he stumbled backward, feeling the room twist around him, colors blending into a dark, suffocating haze. In a desperate attempt to escape, he turned and bolted down the hallway, the laughter crescendoing behind him. Shadows clung to his heels, clawing at him, whispering secrets of those who once traversed the bridge. He stumbled out the front door, gasping for air, heart pounding as he dove back into the grip of the oppressive mist. Panicking, he ran down the gravel path, hardly aware of where he was going. But as he reached the road, every direction seemed familiar, calling him back to the bridge, still waiting, hungry for his return. The whispers transformed into screams, pleading and furious, begging him to turn around. "You can't escape your fate," they shrieked, echoing in the oppressive fog. Tom's mind raced. Was this the beginning of the end? Or was there a way to break free from the clutches of the darkness that seemed to envelop him? As he hurried back toward his car, he could see shadows forming in the mist. Figures that looked almost human, their mouths stretched wide in agony, their eyes filled with desperate longing. With every step he took, the feeling of dread crept closer. The figures reached out, their hands swirling like smoke, trying to pull him into the void. He dove into his car, slamming the door shut, but the atmosphere thickened, pressing against the windows like a solid wall, threatening to crush him. His breath came in quick gasps as he fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life, but before he could drive away, he caught sight of something through the windshield. The figures were now all around him, a swirling mass of lost souls, trapped by the bridge and drawn back into its embrace. They moved with an unearthly grace, their faces a blend of fury and sorrow. Suddenly, one figure stepped forward, knee-deep in fog, its face finally emerging. It was him, a darker version, an echo from the other side. Tom felt his heart drop as the doppelganger's eyes glowed with an unsettling light, lips curling into a sinister smile. "You should have never crossed the bridge, Tom. It's too late now," it hissed, and the shadows began to writhe behind it, restless and hungry. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, panic setting in, but deep down something shifted. He remembered the tales, how those who faced their fears could reclaim their lives. In that moment of raw terror, Tom knew he had to confront whatever had followed him. "Leave me alone," he shouted, battling back the mounting dread. The figment inched closer, its smile widening. "You're one of us now," it hissed, its voice a chilling echo of his own. But Tom's fear morphed into something else, strength fueled by rage. "You don't own me," he screamed, pounding the gas pedal. The car lunged forward, shattering the haze, the figures screaming as the headlights sliced through the darkness. But the mist thickened, the shadows growing fiercer, clawing at his vehicle as he raced toward the distant glow of the exit, the cruel laughter fading, but not entirely gone. He surged forward, fighting against the tendrils of darkness that reached for him, clawing at the very fabric of his reality. And in that heart-stopping moment of reckoning, he felt something snap within him like a fraying rope. The car accelerated, piercing through the fog, and for a fleeting second, his heart believed he'd escaped whatever haunted him. But as the laughter faded, he had a looming realization. A fear deeper than he had ever known was only just beginning. The road before him now twisted into an unsettling scene, each turn deeper into uncharted territory, roads that felt like they led to nowhere. And the shadows, always lurking just behind, whispered promises of return, reminding him that the bridge was not just a place. It was a haunting reality that would continue to tether him to darkness, eternally waiting for his inevitable decision to look back. Tom knew this wasn't over. The boundary between the world he knew and the shadows he escaped was blurred, and he could feel their pull, an ancient call that would not let him go. Tom pressed his foot harder against the gas pedal, the engine roaring defiantly against the eerie stillness that surrounded him. The tires screeched against the asphalt, and each turn felt like a descent into a deeper madness as he raced away from the bridge. Yet, the feeling of being pursued hung in the air, a palpable pressure, like fingers curling intimately around his throat. The trees lining the road became a blur, dark silhouettes against the moonlight that fought to break through the fog. Shadows weaved in and out of his periphery, darting like phantoms, challenging his perception of reality. Each time he glanced at the rearview mirror, he half expected to see the figures from the mist closing in on him, their agonized faces twisted into expressions of torment. Suddenly, the road forked, creating a decision he had not anticipated. One path continued into the dense woods. The other led to a rusted sign, creaking in the wind, its letters partially obscured by creeping vines. It warned of treacherous conditions ahead and spoke of lost souls wandering in the night. But something about the atmosphere pulled him toward the way marked with faded words, sanctuary. He hesitated only briefly before aiming his car down the left path. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The fog thickened until it felt like a suffocating blanket, the air heavy with tension that fought against his every breath. The foliage closed in around him, branches scraping against the car like skeletal hands trying to drag him back into the shadows. It was unnaturally silent now, the chirping of crickets gone, replaced by a heartbeat-like thrum, quick and heavy, echoing in his ears. As he drove deeper, a chill crept into the car, latching onto his skin with icy fingers. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel, panic fluttering deep within him. The headlights illuminated patches of fog here and there, revealing distorted shapes that seemed to shift and recede. He could swear he heard faint whispers, soft and deceptive, calling him back, urging him to succumb to the darkness. "Turn around," a voice whispered. "It's safer back there." He shook his head vigorously, trying to dislodge the sound or whatever was trying to toy with his mind. Just then, the road emerged into a small clearing, revealing an abandoned cabin hunched over like a monster in slumber, its windows dark and empty, one of the shutters hanging precariously, creaking softly. It was undeniably old, covered in vines and decay, but a sense of lingering warmth emanated from it, something compelling him to investigate. Compulsively, he parked outside, his heart racing faster as he stepped out of the car. The air felt electric, a tension building around him as he approached the cabin, each step crunching on the gravel. The door seemed to sigh open at his touch, revealing the dim interior, shadows pooling around old furniture, their edges sharp and defined. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight, taking on ghostly shapes as he crossed the threshold. Inside, the air was thick with stale memories. Rotting wood creaked as he moved further into the gloom, the beam of his light sweeping across faded photographs lining the walls. Portraits of smiling families, laughter forever captured in time, were intermixed with deeper shadows, as if the happiness had long since evaporated and left behind only the sorrow of what remained. He approached one photo, the faces seemingly alive, eyes watching him intently. Suddenly, he shivered as a cold breeze swept through, carrying with it an undeniable sense of despair. The shadows flickered eerily, and Tom felt as if he were not alone, as if unseen eyes were scrutinizing him from the corners of the room. He turned abruptly, searching the space, but only the darkness replied, wrapping around him like a shroud. "Stay with us," came the voice again, clearer this time, echoing off the walls, sending chills racing down his spine. He spun around, searching frantically for the source, finding only the wretched furniture attempting to communicate their own long-lost fragments of existence. In his gut, he felt that these spirits were waiting, watching for something to transpire. "Tom," a whisper persistently slipped through the air, almost melodic in tone, but thick with dripping sorrow. The sound came from somewhere deeper inside the cabin, pulling him forward like a moth to a flame. With every strained heartbeat, he felt compelled to follow it, drawn deeper into the shadows. The room constricted around him as he stepped into the adjoining area, an old living room with tattered furniture, and it was here he discovered a grand mirror that seemed out of place, its surface glimmering faintly even in the dim light. Despite the thick, swirling atmosphere, something about this mirror captivated him. As he stepped closer, the whispers crescendoed, invigorating his trepidation. He gazed into its depths, expecting to see his own reflection staring back at him, but instead, he saw a swirling darkness, shadows undulating as if alive. The room behind him faded, replaced by scenes of the past. Flickering images of a family gathered by the fireplace, laughter entwined with sorrow, their joy punctuated by a shadow that loomed behind them, a dark, writhing mass that seemed to drink in their happiness. In those fleeting moments, Tom felt a suffocating understanding wash over him. The family had been happy once, trapped in their memories, but the figure behind them sought to shatter that joy, rendering them merely echoes of their former selves. He stepped back, the cold dread tightening around his heart, only to bump into something hard behind him. Spinning into the darkness, he felt a quick rush of air, as though someone or something had moved past him. His breath hitched as he turned, expecting the worst. But there was nothing, just the overwhelming silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. Yet, the palpable presence of a watcher lurked at the edges of his senses, and panic crept up his throat. "I have to get out," he murmured, glancing around wildly, as the foreboding touch of reality tightened its grip on him. As he moved back toward the door, the air shifted. The whispers turned into shrieks, an anguished cacophony that combined into a frenzy, making the room spin. "You can't leave. You must stay. You'll become one of us." Desperation clawed at his mind as he raced through the memories echoing in the corners of the rooms. He tore open the door, the wooden frame groaning as if protesting his escape. The night outside had transformed, the moon obscured by thick, swirling clouds, and the fog now alive with darkness creeping toward him. Without thinking, he dashed for the car, the engine still throbbed with residual heat, a welcome sound. As he slid into the seat, the ravaging despair flooded back, thick as the fog closing in. The moment the door slammed shut, he heard it, the cacophony of desperation behind him, the cries of lost souls mingling with desperate laughter that filled the air. Engines roaring back to life. He threw the car into gear, tires screeching as he peeled away. But as he sped forward, he knew all too well this wasn't merely a chase. This was an escape from something that would follow him beyond the threshold of the cabin, a darkness ever waiting. In his rearview mirror, the cabin receded, swallowed by the mist, but he could swear that he saw figures standing in the doorway, their shapes flickering in and out, faces unrecognizable, but bearing the signature of lost time, racked with the age of untold losses. A dark realization settled in his gut. This was only the beginning. Each mile he drove seemed to stretch into eternity, the roads serpentine and treacherous. As the fog wrapped around him like a living cloak, he wondered if he could ever truly escape from what had chased him. Silent screams reverberated in his mind as he pressed on, each ripple of thought echoing the warnings he had heard. Then suddenly, the road ended, collapsing into a sheer drop-off that gave way to nothingness. He slammed on the brakes, physics threatening to seal his fate as the gravel skidded beneath him, tire smoke rising around him like spectral hands reaching for his soul. He looked around, panic rising in his throat once more. Behind him, the air shimmered as shadows coalesced together, forming that familiar menacing figure, each shape a collection of lost souls. As the realization struck him, the whispers returned, now hauntingly melodic, yet filled with an unsettling urgency. "Join us, Tom. You cannot escape your destiny." In that moment, Tom understood there was no escape. The bridge had marked him, bound him to its darkness, and the entity lurking just behind him would not stop until he embraced the fate that beckoned so eagerly. As he hovered on the precipice, heart racing, he felt a surge of resolve. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn the tide. Maybe he could pull himself free from this horrific tether that grasped at his very being. Rethinking the choices ahead, he turned back toward his pursuers, fists tightening around the steering wheel, ready to confront the shadows that demanded his surrender. Tom gripped the steering wheel tighter, heart pounding as he faced the shadowy figures that had materialized behind him. They were no longer just vague shapes. They took form in the flickering light, tattered clothes hanging on gaunt frames, hollow eyes staring straight into his soul. Each face told a story etched in pain, their mouths moving in silent screams, begging for release or perhaps asking him to join their ranks. Suddenly, the wind picked up, whipping around him like a living thing, carrying with it a cacophony of whispers that filled his ears. When he looked back, the fog swirled thicker, blotting out the world behind him. The figures seemed to drift closer, their movements unnatural, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings, jerking and twitching with an uncanny rhythm. The weight of their eyes pressed in, merging terror and despair into a palpable force that threatened to pull him under. "You can't escape, Tom." The voice echoed through him, low and resonant, stirring up every anxious thought he'd tried to suppress. They edged forward, the darkness around them crackling with energy, and he felt the car tremble beneath him as if the vehicle itself was aware of the growing evil. Each spectral presence beckoned him closer, their fingers reaching with a desperate longing, as if the air between him and them thinned, drawing him into their despair. Determined to resist, Tom slammed the car into reverse, spinning the wheel hard in an attempt to break free from the nightmarish hold. The gravel crunched loudly under his tires, sending a spray of loose stones as he veered away from the ledge. Adrenaline surged through him, quickening his movements, but in the chaos, he didn't notice the shadows creeping in from the edge of the road, their forms etching into the light with sinister grace. They twisted into view, their mouths stretching into sinister grins, as tired eyes bore witness to the despair that had befallen him. In his frenzy, he looked forward, searching for a way out, but the road vanished in a thick mist, turning into a winding trail of illusions. Frantically, he pressed the gas pedal, the engine roaring like a beast awakened from slumber, but the shadows gave chase. They enveloped the car, their whispers clawing at his mind, and the air within closed in, heavy with an insidious gloom that seemed determined to choke him. Stay with us. Forever, they hissed, a chorus of twisted voices weaving together, riding the wind, weaving into his thoughts. Tom could almost feel their breath on his neck, rancid and cold, causing goosebumps to crawl over his skin. He fought against the rising tide of fear, shaking his head violently to clear the encroaching darkness. But the fog thickened, swirling around his car like a hungry predator. Vision reduced to a few feet in front of him. He could feel the road rippling beneath him, shifting as if it too were alive, intent on leading him back into the grasp of those waiting behind. Desperation clawed at his gut. Every fiber of his being screamed to go faster. Yet his instincts warned him to slow down, to think rationally, even as the shadows began to stretch toward him, reaching for his car like tendrils of malevolence. The wheels screamed against the gravel, and despite his desperation, they groaned under the weight of the confrontation lurking in the corners of his mind. Just ahead, the trees leaned ominously, their branches curling like the talons of a beast ready to snatch him back. He swerved sharply to avoid them, but the moment of reprieve was short-lived. The darkness around him thickened, so he could barely see, but those voices pulled him, promising secrets, offering the solace he could never find in the light. A sudden blare of his horn ruptured the silence, panic fueling his movements as he glanced at the rearview mirror. What he saw sent shivers racing down his spine. The specters had multiplied, swarming near the back of the car, their ghastly faces illuminated by the glow of the headlights. He caught sight of one face, twisted in agony, grinning maniacally, eyes wide and pleading, as if they wanted to drag him into their eternal torment. A chill washed over him. It was too late to turn back now. In a moment of sheer instinct, he veered off the road, sending the car lurching into an overgrown path, the underbrush snapping as he barreled through. Branches clawed at the sides of the car, scraping against the metal with haunting intensity. The thudding heart of the engine echoed through the woods, a frantic rhythm that matched the fear pounding in his chest. But escape was a fading dream. Ahead, the path widened into a small clearing, bathed in a pale, sickly light. In the center stood a totem, an ancient-looking stone structure draped in moss and strange carvings that seemed to writhe and change shape when he blinked. The air around it hummed with a disquieting energy, buzzing in an uncomfortable way that set his nerves on edge. It's a trap, a stray thought flitted through his mind, but his foot betrayed him as it steeled against the gas pedal. The throbbing sensation of urgency pulled him closer to the eerie light. He had no choice. The shadows were relentless, their whispers filling every gap of thought, drowning him in despair. As he skidded to a stop, he jumped from the car, driven by a primal instinct to flee. The moment he stepped onto the ground, the earth felt wrong beneath his feet, pulsing like a heartbeat, alive and hungry. The whispers escalated into a wail, each voice rising in pitch, drowning out his thoughts in a chaotic symphony of despair. Without a moment to process, he felt an overwhelming presence, something dark and powerful coiled around him. He turned, and in the fading light, witnessed figures emerging from the shadows, their forms flickering like static on a broken screen. They advanced, their faces stretched into grotesque smiles, eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "You've arrived, Tom," they sang in harmony, an unsettling chorus that knifed through the night. The shadows closed in, choking the light, the whispers climaxing in a deafening roar. He stumbled back, colliding against the cold stone of the totem, the carvings shifting beneath his touch, seemingly alive on the surface. He roared in horror as he felt the touch of cool hands brush against his skin, grazing him like whispers made flesh, seeping into his mind and twisting his resolve. "Join us, embrace the void," the voices chanted, wrapping around him, promising eternal rest in their chilling embrace. As despair tightened its grip, Tom felt the cold claw of realization. The sanctuary wasn't a haven. It was a prison built from the souls of those who had come before, and he was meant to become one with their eternal suffering. But buried deep within him, a spark of defiance ignited. He pushed against the rising tide of darkness, forcing the voices to recede, even as they clawed at his mind. With a roar fueled by adrenaline and fury, he lunged back toward his car, refusing to succumb to the suffocating shadows. Yet as he raced back, he saw the figures flicker and dissolve, melding into the fog, only to reappear moments later, moving closer in an ethereal dance. They laughed softly, a haunting sound that sent chills racing down his spine. He reached his car, fumbling for the handle. The engine still hummed softly, a hum of familiarity amidst the chaos. But even as he climbed back inside, he felt the dark intentions of the shadows swirling around him, pulling at him like a tide. The whispers grew into a deafening roar, blaring in his ears, threatening to flood his mind with their unspeakable horrors. As he started the engine, a wave of determination surged through him. He had faced them. He couldn't let the shadows win. The headlights pierced the darkness ahead, illuminating the trail that lay before him. With gritted teeth, he slammed the car into gear and accelerated, breaking through the oppressive aura that sought to consume him. The road stretched out, the trees blurring past him like specters in the night. The howling wind filled the car, carrying the lost voices of those he had abandoned. But he knew he had to keep driving. He had to escape, and yet the lingering dread whispered that this was not over. It was only the beginning of a dark journey fraught with chaos and despair. And even now, the shadows lingered just beyond the edge of his light. As he raced forward, Tom stole a glance in the rearview mirror one last time. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a girl, a child, face pressed against the glass, her features pale and anguished. In that split second, his heart twisted. "Help us," she mouthed silently. And with that, the figures surged back into view, shadows overflowing like ink in water, eager to reclaim their lost hope through him. Their whispers clawed virulently at his resolve. And as he sped away into the night, he knew that every mile he traveled only deepened the mark they had left upon him, an indelible stain of despair that would follow him far beyond the road. As he drove into the abyss of night, the entangling fog thickened around him like a shroud, obscuring the world outside the windshield. The trees along the roadside twisted unnaturally, their gnarled branches clutching at the air as if straining to pull him back into their dark embrace. He felt their longing, a sickening whisper scratching at his mind, pulling him toward the hidden realms within the forest. He clung to the steering wheel, knuckles white, as he fought back the encroaching truth that he was not alone. Every now and then, he could see movement out of the corner of his eye, shimmering figures darting just beyond the periphery of his vision, distorted shapes that flickered like candle flames, tempting him to look closely. Each fleeting specter was a reminder of what chased him, an echo of the chorus of despair that belied his every breath. "Stay, stay with us." Their voices echoed through the confines of the vehicle, syrupy and sweet, but with a razor's edge of longing that reeked of death. He winced, pushing the thought away as he cranked the radio up in a desperate attempt to drown them out. Metal blared, a frantic distraction that caused him to wince. It didn't help at all, just made the darkness whisper louder, the shadows surge forward even more. Suddenly, the car sputtered, and the engine coughed violently as though its very spirit was trapped within. No, no, no. Panic surged within him. He knew the connection was weakening, and he was running out of time. He had to escape. With every turn, the fog rolled in thicker, swallowing the world around him. A sense of foreboding wrapped around him as he caught glimpses of faces within the mist. Haunted, pleading expressions contorted in agony, just out of reach. Each face was a reminder of the souls bound to the curses of despair, their unseen chains stretching into the void. The tires began to lose traction on the gravel, the car skidding ominously as he pushed the foot down harder, urging it to take flight over the gravelly path ahead. But just as things threatened to spiral out of control, the car lurched forward, then stopped with a jolt. The dashboard lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across his face. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The world was swallowed in a stifling silence, except for the drumming pulse in his ears. Suddenly, From the depths of the shadows beyond the windshield, a figure emerged, slowly and purposefully. A woman, her form wavering like a heat wave, floated just at the edge of the forest. Her hair pooled and danced around her like serpents, fraying and reaching out, while her face, obscured in the dense fog, glowed with a sickly luminescence. As she took a step closer, every heartbeat thundered in his chest, for where her foot had touched the ground, flowers of a stark black blossomed, filled with a deep beauty that felt sinister. "Help me!" Her voice spilled forth, a siren's lullaby that slithered into his mind like a dark mist. Tom's mouth went dry, the word catching in his throat. He could see her eyes now, vacant and glassy, reflecting the stars that had dimmed above. With each blink, the air thickened, as though time itself had slowed. She reached toward him, fingers stained black, each movement deliberate and haunting. Her lips parted in a grin that sent shivers down his spine, revealing a mouth too wide, too filled with teeth that glimmered in shades of predatory hunger. "Join us!" A low growl rumbled from the depths of the forest, a growl that seemed to respond to her call. Shadows darted, swirling behind her, forming darker shapes that melded into the very fabric of the night. Tom's instinct screamed at him to turn away, to flee, yet he was paralyzed, captivated by the macabre beauty of this apparition before him. But another flicker of movement in his peripheral vision broke the spell, a flash of a child's face peering through the trees. The little girl from his rearview mirror, the one he thought he'd left behind. Her hands were pressed against a bough, eyes wide and glistening with tears, her expression screaming a muted warning. "Help me!" She mouthed silently, shadowed figures hovering just behind her, whispering an entreaty that shattered the moment. He was torn. The creature beckoning him with a promise of release fought with the child's despair clawing at his heart. He made up his mind, wrenching the gear into reverse with a force that sent fresh pain shooting up his arm. The tires screeched and spun as he thrust the car backwards, desperate to escape the creature's grasp. But the shadows lunged forward, spilling forth like ink, racing to envelop the car. The special stillness that had cloaked the night shattered into a frenzy, their whispers crescendoing as terrifying faces surged against the glass, grasping like furious lovers. "You cannot leave," they screamed, the unity of voices shrill against the wind, each utterance a shard of ice driving through his soul. The car vibrated under the weight of their desperation, like they were trying to break through the glass, clawing for a second chance, a shred of their lost hope. "No!" Tom shouted, feeling the madness claw at him. The fog thickened, curling around the car, swirling into fantastical shapes, a dark whirlpool sucking in his resolve. The engine sputtered again, a wheeze escaping the exhaust, and he gritted his teeth, pushing down on the accelerator harder. Ahead, he caught a glimpse of headlights breaking through the fog, the promise of salvation. He slammed his foot down as his heart raced with renewed vigor. But the moment he hit the gas, the headlights flickered, disappearing into the obscurity. The eerie laughter of the shadows peaked, echoing in the hollow chambers of his mind as he tore his gaze forward. That laughter melded with the symphony of whispers, evolving into an unsettling chant chanting that reverberated through his skin, causing bile to rise in his throat. Vivid scenes and memories twisted into grotesque shadows in the reflection of the rearview mirror, reminders of what once was. Shapes morphed before him, like a twisted reflection caught between reality and insanity, a no man's land between existence and oblivion. The figures behind him danced in a macabre ballet, stretching their hands as if they could pull him into the void. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, frosting over the windshield, the chill seeping into his bones, and he shuddered against it, fighting the encroaching dread that threatened to swallow him whole. The shadows surged, their energies converging, a funnel of despair aimed directly at him. "Embrace the darkness. Become one with us," they echoed, a pleading song wrapped in malice that promised he would never be alone again. And just then, the child's voice broke through the cacophony, sharp and clear as the night. "Don't listen," she cried, begging for him to break free. Her face twisted with a terror that sparked something deep within him. With one last breath, he cast off the chains of doubt that threatened to pull him under. Slamming the gas pedal to the floor, he felt the vehicle lurch forward, shaking the air heavy with threat. The headlights flickered back to life, illuminating the twisted path ahead, and he shot forward, exiting the bitter grasp of the could-be demons that sought to claim him. But salvation was fleeting. Ahead of him, the road twisted again, this time darker than before, a feral grin etched into the asphalt that seemed to seep deeper into the very ground he stood upon. He felt the shadows about to engulf him again, whispering secrets in a language he could not discern, yet felt compelled to understand. Tom pressed forward, defiant, desperate to escape this nightmare. He knew, though, as the shadows loomed heavier, that no matter how far he drove, they would always follow. "You'll never leave," they murmured, as the path narrowed and his fate twisted onward into the darkness. Then he hit something solid that caused the car to jolt violently, metal grinding against whatever he had struck. He gasped, adrenaline surging as he glanced in disbelief at the figures now sprawled across the road. They were only mere moments before haunting shadows, but now they took on flesh, faces of those lost, twisted with joy and horror. For a heartbeat, everything froze again. The figures watched him with hollow eyes, mere remnants of life. "You're one of us now," they whispered, merging together in a cacophony of agony and despair, faces blending and stretching until they were something altogether other, shifting as fluid as the shadows they had been moments ago. With every inch he drove forward, the pulse of fear intensified. The chorus of despair turned into a chant, a horrifying serenade to his demise. The fog swirled as the figures melted away from in front of him, replaced by a sprawling expanse of twisted dreams and broken promises. The road now felt like it fell off into an abyss, a downward spiral into the heart of darkness as laughter, cruel and amused, echoed through the encroaching night. The deeper he went, the louder it became, drowning out his own thoughts. Shadows flitted past him, darting from the trees, taking on old forms of happiness before twisting and yearning to reclaim him. "This is your home now," the chant reinforced. The brake lights glowed ominously, casting a fading red hue, illuminating the trees lining the roadside, a hardwood gallery of restless spirits watching, waiting. What began as a desperate flight had become an endless descent into madness, and as he plunged deeper into the night, he realized there would be no escape. The darkness was alive, breathing, watching, and he could hear its laughter rising above everything else. He was not meant to leave. He was meant to belong. In that moment, the realization crushed him like the weight of 1,000 nightmares. The road beneath him twisted and transformed, swallowing the remnants of asphalt and conjuring an unholy path paved with the faces of the forgotten. They appeared like fleeting shadows, each stretching their mouths wide in silent screams, their hollow eyes pleading, but no sound met the breeze. Tom's heart raced as he turned the steering wheel, the tires screeching against the blackened earth, tearing at his sanity. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed behind him. He flinched, glancing into the rearview mirror, only to be confronted by a vortex of shadows swirling together, a dark wall that expanded and contracted, growing closer with each heartbeat. He turned back to the road, but the trees closed in tighter, their gnarled branches arching over him like the skeletal arms of the damned, draping him in a curtain of despair. "You cannot run," they seemed to murmur, their rustling leaves a voice of certainty. He felt compelled to look again, and when he did, he saw someone emerging from the mass. A gaunt figure stepped forward, too thin, like paper stretched over a frame. The woman, if that's what she once was, moved with fluid grace, her body twisting unnaturally, as if she defied the very laws of nature. Her hair, black as pitch, flowed behind her like smoke, and her skin glistened, slick and wet under the dim light of the moon. "Are you lost, Tom?" she breathed, but her voice was not hers alone. It echoed with a chorus of whispers. each syllable a dagger carving deep into his resolve. He slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the gravel, spiraling, spinning, until he finally came to a halt, a graceless jolt that sent pain lancing through his body. Heart pounding, he groped for the door handle, but his fingers were numbing with terror, paralyzed as if the very shadows surrounding him had clawed their way into his mind. Suddenly, the air within the car thickened, swirling like a fog that suffocated him. The temperature plunged. He could see his breath, each exhale mingling with the encroaching darkness. It wrapped around him, squeezing tighter, as if the very night wanted to suck him under. Then he heard it, the soft patter of footsteps circling the car, a rhythmic reminder that he was not alone. No, they were all around him, a horde of serpentine shadows that slithered and curled against the metal frame, whispering sweet nothings that tickled the edge of insanity. Stay with us, forever. They pressed against the windows, figures emerging from the gloom. One of them was the little girl again, a fleeting glimpse through the foggy glass. Her small hands were now sticky red, smeared with something dark that dripped onto the ground. She banged against the window, eyes wide in pleading desperation. "Tom, please, don't let them take you." But the shadows tightened their grip, growing louder, mingling their voices until all he heard was the cacophony spiraling into a roar. His gaze flicked back and forth, confusion stealing his breath. "Join us," the haunting chant blasted through the car, pushing against his skull. "Join us?" He gritted his teeth, shaking his head violently as he sought refuge in denial. Yet the haunting laughter rumbled, echoing from each corner of his mind, growing louder, more insistent. They knew, somehow, they knew every fear, every secret he tried to conceal. They wrapped around his heart, a vine tightening, squeezing out the last remnants of hope. In a moment of sheer panic, he threw the car into reverse, the headlights flashing wildly as he shot backward. The headlights illuminated a gnarled oak, ancient and twisted, its roots clawing at the earth like the fingers of the damned. For a moment, he thought he saw a face carved into its trunk, eyes bright with malevolence. "You'll never escape," it seemed to whisper, the wind carrying its words away like a fading memory. Tom pressed the accelerator hard, sending gravel flying in all directions. But the shadows cascaded over the car, surrounding it from every side, slashing at the glass with sharp claws that glimmered like shards of glass. The car rattled, metal screaming against the assault. Panic surged. He scrambled to the gear shift, trying to shift into drive again. And then he saw her. The woman. Her face was now pressed against the windshield, those soulless eyes locking onto his, as though she could see into his very essence. A smile split her face wide, stretching impossibly wide, filling the space with a horror that sent a chill straight to his bones. "We've been waiting for you," she cooed, each word layered with promise and dread. Before he could respond, the car lurched violently, and suddenly, the world outside twisted and multiplied. The trees, once still, now shifted, bending and curling into grotesque shapes, their trunks writhing as if alive. Shadows stepped out of the trees, separating from the darkness, pulling free the memories of every lost soul that had ever wandered here. Their mouths moved in reverent synchronization, forming a twisted hymn that slithered through the night. "Join us. Let us take you home." The shadows curled around the car like a casket, filling every crevice, entrapping him in their dark embrace. They danced around the vehicle, a whirlwind of tortured faces wailing endlessly, a symphony of despair that clawed at the edges of his sanity. Each face buzzed with recognition. People he knew, friends and acquaintances long gone. Their eyes were glassy, reflecting a blend of anguish and acceptance. He slammed his eyes shut, trying to drown out the sight, but their whispers wormed into his ears, incessant and unforgiving. "You were meant to stay, meant to join us." Then the little girl reappeared in his mind's eye, her red-stained hands reaching for him once more. "Tom, don't believe them," she screamed, her eyes pleading for salvation from a fate worse than death. The car began to vibrate fiercely, a pulse of despair flooding through the air, making him feel sick. Desperation clawed at his throat as he gritted his teeth, fighting to keep control. He flipped the headlights from bright to dim again, and with a lurch, the shadows hesitated, recoiling for a brief moment. "Run, Tom, please." That was all it took. He flicked the gear into drive, the tires screeching loudly as he floored the gas, sending adrenaline surging through his veins. The headlights burst alive, lashing out against the darkness, and he shot forward, leaving the howling shadows behind, shrieking as they clawed at the car in vain. But he could feel them clawing at him still, an echo that tinted every breath he took. The road surged ahead, twisting and turning into infinity, and the night grew denser, thick as a heartbeat. Shadows danced along the periphery of his vision, flitting just out of reach, but whispering promises he yearned to escape. Every glance to the side revealed a slither of movement, a flash of black, darting just beyond the light. Conversations that had once been lucid became jumbled, fragmented. He could hear laughter distorting, voices blending into a symphony that threatened to drown him entirely. A deep growl resonated from behind. He glanced in the rearview mirror again, breath catching as he saw them surging. Shadow beasts with eyes aflame, their bodies twisting in unnatural ways, entire forms made of the darkness itself. They raced toward him, fueled by a hunger that filled the air with a heavier dread. "You can't hide," they screamed, their voices vibrating the very car he was in, an onslaught of palpable terror merging with his thoughts. Changing tactics, Tom swerved wildly, desperate to shake them off, but instead of retreating, they just kept coming, relentless and unyielding. In a last-ditch effort, he jerked the wheel, sending the car careening off-road, crashing through underbrush. The world around him blurred into a haze of movement, shadows dispersing momentarily as the thrum of the vehicle interrupted the chorus of despair. But he felt it then, a sensation deep in his gut, a certainty that he'd entered into something worse. The forest closed in, and he barreled deeper into the unknown, praying for salvation but knowing, deep down, that darkness was not done with him yet. An eerie calmness settled around him as he drove deeper into the thick woods, the shadows now whispering a different tune. To his horror, the girl's voice returned, soft yet firm, echoing like a distant bell tolling in the night. It's not too late, but the forest morphed into a maze, branches clawing toward him like skeletal fingers, the path winding tighter and tighter, a nightmarish labyrinth from which there seemed to be no escape. With every turn, the shadows thickened, weaving into an impenetrable shroud that swallowed the light. He was in their world now, a place sewn together by forgotten anguishes. Silhouettes danced just out of reach, taunting him as he pressed onward, knowing he was but a pawn in their game. Tom's grip tightened around the steering wheel, an iron resolve taking root. The whispers crescendoed into a fevered pitch, clawing at the very edges of his mind. They promised him power, a sense, a belonging unlike any he'd ever experienced. "Join us, Tom. You will never be alone again." He blinked rapidly, trying to hold on to his sense of self. This was wrong. This was not where he was supposed to be. "Please wake up," he muttered to himself. But around him, the forest only darkened, and darkness twisted into something tangible, something that smelled of despair and fear. Ahead, he saw a clearing, bathed in an unnatural orange glow. He had to reach it. He pushed the car forward, the headlights illuminating a scene that froze his blood. The ground littered with remnants of the lost, clothing, trinkets, and photographs buried in the earth, each piece a fragment of lives devoured by the abyss. Tom's heart sank. What had started as a dream of escape now felt like a waking nightmare, an invitation to relinquish his soul and embrace the dark embrace of the lost. "Help us," the voices wove tightly around him, almost seductive in their delivery. But he would not succumb so easily. With a bound of courage that felt absurd in the growing dread, Tom yanked the steering wheel hard to the left, slamming the brakes as he careened toward the edge of the glowing clearing. The moment the car halted, the shadows surged forward, flooding around him like a ravenous tide, dark figures surging to envelop him. Tom flung open the door and stumbled into the clearing, gasping as the air transformed into a mixture of heat and cold, a disorienting blend that sent his heart racing. Within the motion, the figures paused, eyeing him warily, their hunger momentarily suspended. "You're free to leave," came the beckoning voice, dripping with malice and charm, deep and unsettling. But he didn't trust them. He feared what lay beyond the edges of the light. "No," he yelled, defiance roaring through his veins. He took a step back, but more and more shadows emerged, sprawling toward him, a grotesque tapestry woven from the cries of the damned. Desperation clawed at him. He spun on his heel, plunging back into the depths of the forest, the whispers turning into frantic howls, demanding he return. As he sprinted, he could feel that cold breath on his neck, a chilling shadow brushing against him, laughter rising again, mocking, daring him to relent. Each stride was a fight against the void, every push against the dense darkness, not just a battle for his life, but for his very soul. But the deeper he ran, the thicker the shadows grew, coiling around him like vines, threatening to rend him apart. Beyond the mist, he caught glimpses of faces, more tortured memories painting the walls of his mind. And yet he pushed onward, fueled by a flicker of hope. Memories of laughter, warmth, and love flickering against the looming darkness. "I will not drown," he screamed to the void itself, his breath coming in heated gasps. Yet, upon his screams echoing into the night, the shadows surged with renewed vigor. They were relentless, their sharp, thin fingers closing in. In the cacophony, a dark shape formed ahead, coalescing into some horrific monstrosity, a morphing figure shrouded in shadows, filled with the voices of the damned. They were wrapped in despair. The dark shape before him squirmed, growing wider, its form twisting as a chorus of cursed voices spilled from its gaping maw. Tom stumbled back, heart pounding in his chest as he felt the weight of their hunger settle over him like a suffocating fog. Each voice seemed to call out to him individually, familiar yet distorted, weaving through his thoughts and making him question everything about his reality. Memories he thought buried clawed their way to the surface. The laughter of friends, the warmth of affection, even the fading echoes of a life long believed normal, all tangled together in a maddening cacophony. With every heartbeat, the monstrosity before him pulsed, its shadowy tendrils reaching out like the limbs of some ancient creature, grasping and weaving around the air. It beckoned with a hand made of despair, a hand that promised to relieve him of his burdens, to wrap him in a darkness that wouldn't let him feel pain anymore. Tom's breath quickened as he remembered the girl, the one who had warned him, her face streaked with a strange mix of sadness and determination. "She's in here somewhere," he thought. "I can't leave her." As if sensing his resolve, the dark figure roared, the sound reverberating through the very trees. A shrill wail pierced the night, sharp and piercing, shattering the fragile moment of clarity Tom had clung to. He felt the ground shudder beneath his feet, like the earth itself was quaking in fear, trying to shake him loose from whatever grip the shadows had on him. "Stay!" the figure shrieked, its voice a haunting blend of every tortured soul it had consumed, a chorus that echoed with both desperation and malice. He turned on his heel, not caring where he ran now, just knowing he had to escape. Branches whipped out like skeletal fingers, scratching at his skin as he surged deeper into the darkness, longing for a flicker of light that might guide him back to safety. The path beneath him felt uncertain, like it shifted with each step. Nothing about this wilderness made any sense anymore. Heaving breaths broke through the silence, and he could hear the whispers of the shadows trailing him, growing louder, more frantic, pressing in around him like a band of nightmarish hunters. Dread filled every inch of the air, thick enough to crawl beneath his skin, leaving a trail of goosebumps in its wake. Suddenly, he stumbled into an open space, moonlight flooding down in eerie pools that painted the ground with strange silver shadows, twisting everything it touched. But even in this brief moment of respite, he felt the atmosphere shift. The shadows curled tighter at the edges, pushing forward relentlessly, whispering sweet nothings that made his stomach churn. The air grew colder as the darkness clung to him, wrapping tighter like chains of ice. He could see shapes forming in the dim light, twisting and convulsing as they slowly materialized. Broken figures emerged, ones he recognized from his past but twisted and disfigured, horror-flecked versions of people he once knew. The laughter of friends now morphed into twisted smiles that bore too many sharp teeth, eyes gleaming with a malevolence he had never seen before. They beckoned to him with grotesque hands, each one grinning wider than he ever remembered. "Join us, Tom." The invitation was insidious, laced with nostalgia and dread, and it clawed at his mind, tempting him to come closer. Every fiber of his being screamed to run, yet part of him longed to reach out, to touch those familiar faces, to revel in the warmth of their presence again. He shook his head hard, backing away as panic prickled at his skin. "No, it's a trick," he mumbled almost to himself. But they continued to sway, their voices merging into a haunting melody. The enchanted moonlight flickered, a potential reprieve turning sinister as the shadows surged closer, greater swathes of darkness devouring patches of light like a monstrous mouth. The beautiful illusion of friendship soon crumbled into a vision of horror, revealing tattered clothes of the lost, their limbs too elongated, contorted in impossible angles, the smiles stretching so wide it seemed as if their mouths would tear apart. Cold sweat coated Tom's skin as the shadows writhed closer, their claws grasping through the edge of light, yearning for him like a choking vine. Then suddenly, with a loud, shrill cutting of air, a guttural scream burst forth from the depths of the distorted figures. It resonated through the night as their faces twisted in anguish. Tom felt the ground tremble at their cries, the trees bending, creaking in response, pushing him to his breaking point. Their darkness wrapped tighter around him, hoping to swallow his fear and turn it into submission. In a burst of adrenaline, Tom turned away from the gathering gloom and dashed for the deeper shadows, the very thing his instincts had warned him against. Each surge of energy pushed him forward as he fought against the weight of their voices, their mournful cries lingering in the air, promising him salvation that he knew was a lie. Suddenly, he stumbled upon a massive tree, its trunk gnarled and twisting like a captured serpent, roots ripping through the ground like claws. Swallowed in twilight, the tree loomed as a monstrous spire amidst the darkness, and he felt it looming above him like a reminder of all lost things. He recognized this tree. Memories flashed of a childhood dare, an adventure long forgotten. It was where he and his friends would gather only to tease each other of the myths surrounding it, the stories of a curse. This tree was said to guard the souls, one friend had said, eyes wide and shining under the moon. If you touch it and listen closely, you might hear the lost speaking. But his friends had been foolish, lost in their own bravado. He couldn't help but think. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake to toy with the unknown, and now he could almost hear the heavy breaths of those it once consumed. The whispers grew deafening, a tumultuous tide of voices washing over him, drowning out his thoughts completely. He pressed against the tree, feeling its rough bark biting into his skin, the echoes pulsing through him like a heartbeat. Forces within the tree seemed to ignite, the roots thrumming, almost alive. "You are part of us now," the shadows hissed, wrapping around his feet, dragging him into the very earth beneath the tree. Tom could feel the cool earth beneath him beginning to tremble, as if each heartbeat throbbed through the ground like a death knell. With each passing moment, he felt the shadows crawling in, a longing to merge him with the lost souls, those he had run from moments before. "Tom," the girl's voice returned, scattering warmth among the shadows. "Fight." With defiance built from desperation, he drove his fingers deep into the gnarled bark of the tree, trying to latch onto something, anything, that would anchor him to his past. "You cannot hold what has been taken," the darkness breathed, overwhelming him as it encroached upon his mind, wild and electric. But amidst the creeping gloom, there was a flicker of hope, a thread of courage igniting within him. The girl's voice stronger now, guiding him as he held onto the memories that mattered. Against the suffocating weight, he took a breath and yelled, loud and defiant, "I will not be yours." And with that, an explosion of light surged around him, the shadows retreating, howling in rage as spectral faces melted away, each scream echoing into nothingness. Tom found himself on his knees, clutching the tree, panting heavily, engulfed in the shards of memory that surrounded him. The darkness waned, the whispers dulled, leaving a mere echo of what had once threatened to engulf him. Yet, as he looked into the shadowy distance, fragments of the dam still lingered at the edges, a potent reminder of the abyss that awaited him, of what he had narrowly escaped. He rose slowly, feeling the weight of his own breath, the chill still lingering in the air. There was no path ahead, only a foreboding silence wrapped in uncertainty. Tom gritted his teeth and pushed forward, determined to escape this nightmare, knowing inside he could not simply leave behind the echoes of those lost in the darkness. He felt the path beneath him shift again, a pulsing heartbeat through the forest, sounding like a warning. But he pressed onward, fueled by that tiny glimmer of light. The voice of the girl still urging him to remember, to not turn away from the truth, no matter how terrifying. Each step he took away from the cursed tree felt heavier, the remnants of darkness swirling menacingly around him. But he also felt a newfound strength. Perhaps there was a route still to take, a way to illuminate this darkness, to change his path, and collect those lost souls left behind. Through the tangle of roots and shadows that seemed to tighten around his every movement, he whispered a firm vow. "I will bring you back." And with each word, the world around him sighed and rumbled, the shadows quieting momentarily, as if they feared the truth that lay in the depths of his determination. Little did he realize, something sinister was watching, something much darker lurking in the folds of the night, waiting for its moment to strike. As Tom pressed onward, his footsteps felt increasingly heavy upon the ground, each crunch of leaves echoing unnaturally loud, as if the forest itself was tuning in to his rhythm. The trees loomed over him, twisted and warped, their gnarled branches reaching out like desperate fingers trying to draw him back into the darkness. The air grew colder, thicker, as if it were alive, pressing against his chest with a weight that made it hard to breathe. Shadows danced along the periphery of his vision, darting behind the trees as they seemed to whisper secrets to one another, a chorus of unwanted thoughts that taunted him. "You can't escape." It was a voice, low and gravelly, rustling through the underbrush, wrapping around him in a chilling embrace. He shuddered, feeling the need to run faster, but something kept him rooted to the spot, a morbid curiosity pulling him deeper into the unknown. With trepidation, he glanced back the way he came. The clearing he had just left was a smear of shadows now, a dark pit where the light seemed to falter and die. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd left something behind, something precious that tethered him to his sanity. His heart raced as he tried to focus on the path ahead, the twisting trail now obscured by an ever-thickening fog that rolled in from the depths of the forest, thick and suffocating. The fog whirled around him like a living entity, swallowing the faint moonlight, creating a disorienting swirl of darkness. Sounds shifted, branches cracking off in the far distance, rhythmic thumps that sounded almost like footsteps following him, keeping pace. He glanced back over his shoulder but saw nothing but empty air. Then, a voice rang out, clear amid the chaos, a high-pitched cackle that sent icy fingers down his spine. It echoed through the mist, bouncing off trees, wrapping around him until he felt as if the air itself was alive with malice. "Come play with us, Tom." Through the suffocating fog, he discerned moving shapes, twisted silhouettes of children, flickering in and out of focus like candle flames. They giggled, sharp and haunting, their faces smeared with shadows. A sinister sweetness underpinned their laughter, enticing yet unnatural. They beckoned him closer, their little hands outstretched like starving ghosts. He could almost see the glimmer of their eyes, reflecting an insatiable hunger that terrified him. As one moved closer, Tom recognized the pale face of a girl he knew, Lila, from school. But there was something wrong. Her features were slack, almost drooping as if her face couldn't hold the shape it was meant to. Her smile was too wide, splitting her face in a way that felt sickening. "Tom, we want you to join us. Forever." Panic surged through him, igniting primal instincts to run as he staggered back. But their giggles turned into shrieks, fraying the serene silence around him, transforming it into a frantic symphony of chaos. Branches cracked around him like bones. The very ground seemed to tremble with their growing rage. The fog grew denser, thickening to a point where he could hardly see his own hands. Terror clawed at his throat as he stumbled backward into a tree, feeling bark tearing against his skin, sharp splinters biting into his palms as he fought to keep his balance. Thick roots coiled like snakes, grasping at his ankles, threatening to pull him down into the earth, deeper into the darkness that yearned to swallow him whole. Tom felt the familiar tug at the edges of his mind. Images of past friends, laughter, warmth, but now twisted into nightmares of what they had become, echoes of souls ensnared. He turned abruptly, his breath now shallow and frantic, dread hammering in his chest. Shadows rushed forward, swirling like a tempest, a cacophony of whispers filling the air. His very name twisted into a ghostly chant, a chorus of despair that clawed at his resolve. "Tom, Tom, come back." He ran hard, bolting through the mist that distorted his senses, opening into another clearing shrouded in ominous quiet. The fog receded just enough to reveal a dilapidated wooden structure, a cabin, half sunken into the earth, its windows shattered like broken teeth. Gnarled roots spiraled out, grasping at the weathered floorboards as if the very earth wanted to reclaim it. It felt alive, breathing, resonating with the dark energy seeping from its very core. The air around him crackled like static, each heartbeat echoing deeper into the woods. On instinct, he surged toward the cabin, desperate for shelter, something to block the relentless grasp of the shadows. He broke through the flimsy door, its hinges protesting, groaning as he flung himself inside. The darkness inside enveloped him like a heavy blanket, swallowing any light that dared enter. He fumbled on the floor, dusty and cold against his palms, scouring the edges for anything to defend himself with. Terror was a palpable presence now, pressing in all around him. Behind him, he heard a slow creaking sound, an ominous echo, deep and measured. The cabin seemed to shake with anticipation, as if whatever darkness lay beyond had realized it wasn't alone. Tom quickly turned, his breath caught in his throat. Shapes began to unfurl in the corners, swirling shadows pooling, coalescing into the distorted shapes of those lost friends, their eyes hollow, gazes piercing like cold knives in the dark. "You've hidden from us long enough," they said in unison, voices entwining, a grotesque harmony that clawed at his sanity. "Join us, Tom. We are waiting." The walls seemed to shimmer, flickering in and out of reality, reflecting the anguish etched on their faces. Their hands reached forward, translucent yet with an unholy firmness, grasping for his very essence. Panic bolted through him like lightning, and instinct kicked in again. He had to fight. He grabbed a broken plank lying at his feet, splintered and jagged, something to defend himself from these shadows that called once more for him to give in. With one swift motion, he swung it towards the nearest apparition, but it passed through like smoke, the shimmer of its body dissipating only to reform behind him, a sick grin spreading across its face. "You think you can escape this fate?" One taunted, voice dripping with dread and familiarity. The darkness thickened, cold, suffocating, and it felt as if the walls were closing in around him, sensing his fear, mirroring it back tenfold. Tom forced himself to breathe, the shadows now swirling, growing fangs of madness as they tightened their grip, beckoning him into the depths. He felt his heart clamoring against his ribcage, and for a moment he wished to yield. But the girl's voice pierced through the clamor, urging him back to solid ground, anchoring him in reality. "Fight!" With renewed strength, He took a step back, only to feel the floor beneath him give way, a trapdoor swinging open into a pit of darkness that yawned like a hungry beast. He stumbled back, grasping for anything stable, but the ground was slick, insidious, straining to swallow him. The shadows erupted around him in overwhelming chaos, their howls rising above the din of the night, merging into a single entity of pure terror. Frantically, he swung the plank, catching fleeting shadows, but nothing left a mark. Faces blurred and twisted in the darkness, changing with every strike, whispering his name over and over, filling him with doubt until he felt that familiar weight of despair tethering him to the ground. "You're one of us now, Tom." But as the tumult surged and the darkness howled, he dug deep within himself, searching for the light. The memories he clung to, snippets of laughter, warm days spent in sunlight. They warmed his heart, reminding him of who he truly was, and suddenly, clarity pierced through the fog. He raised the plank high, feeling the air crackle with unspoken energy, words spilling out in a desperate cry. "No, I am not lost. I am here." The shadows recoiled, wailing, their shrieks mingling with the light that responded to his defiance, illuminating the edges of the cabin, pushing against the consuming darkness. As the light spilled forth, it cascaded in waves, washing over the bodies surrounding him. They screamed, their forms dissolving in the brilliant glow, faces contorting into masks of rage and fear. The air shifted, crackling, as the darkness began to unravel, retreating to the corners like a coward lurking in the light. With a fierce cry, Tom pushed forward, stepping through the haze of shadows, light shining brighter as he willed every ounce of strength into his voice. "I will find a way out of this." The cabin began to shake, the oppressive weight of despair dissipating, threads of darkness snapping as he surged against the tide. The echoes of his friends merged into a single haunting wail, but it began to fade, losing its potency as he propelled himself toward the door. Suddenly, the walls shuddered violently, the ground vibrating as if the very foundation was protesting against his escape. The door swung open, revealing an abyss that was both a sanctuary and a grave. Tom didn't hesitate. He leaped through the threshold, bursting into the night, embracing the biting cold air as he emerged from the cabin. The fog started to lift, revealing the twisted landscape beyond, glimmers of moonlight breaking through, illuminating the trees, the path ahead. But he knew it wasn't over yet. The heart of the forest pulsed with an insatiable hunger, shadows swirling and coiling, watching him like a predator assessing its prey. He could sense something watching, the true source of the dread that seeped into the fabric of his very being. Tom pressed on, determination hardening his resolve. Each step forward felt like a defiance against the creeping darkness that followed, ever present, whispering sweetly in his ear as he moved deeper into the heart of the night. "You can't run forever." The words bled into the air, weighty and dark, a reminder that he hadn't escaped the grasp of the shadows yet, but he was not ready to surrender. Not now. With every ounce of strength within him, he fought against the rising tide of fear, forging his path back toward the light, the memories of laughter guiding him. Whatever horror lay beyond the next turn, he would face it head on, refusing to become another whisper in the dark. "I'm coming for you," he called out into the mist, challenging the very essence of fear lurking in the woods. But as he rounded a bend, he stumbled into another clearing, and in that moment, the world shifted, darkness enveloped his senses, and for the first time, he felt truly lost. The air crackled with an uneasy tension, shadows shifting like phantoms, and he realized he may have just unleashed something far worse than he could ever imagine. Tom stood frozen, heart thudding painfully against his ribs, breath hitching as every instinct screamed at him to flee. The clearing opened like a wound, a gash in the fabric of the woods, where the ground twisted and buckled as if trying to spit him back out. The trees loomed high above, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, beckoning him closer into their embrace. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. thick silence settled over the area, muffling even the slightest sounds of the night. Shadows danced, weaving in and out of view, their edges blurring like ink bleeding on paper. For a moment, Tom thought he saw forms moving just beyond his line of sight, something that's never been human, just a fleeting glimpse before it melted back into darkness. Goosebumps prickled along his arms as each breath felt heavier, the air charged with a dense, foreboding energy that wrapped around him, pulling him toward the center of the clearing. Then he heard it, soft, lilting laughter echoing through the trees, a sound that pierced the stillness and sent shivers down his spine. It had an unsettling quality, melodic yet tinged with malice, a sound that felt familiar yet wrong. Moonlight struggled to break through the thick canopy overhead, but when it did, it illuminated what looked like remnants of a long-forgotten ritual. Ritualistic symbols etched into the dirt formed a peculiar pattern, spiraling inward like a vortex, drawing the eye to its center. Bones, small and weathered, lay scattered among the markings, their presence a sickening reminder of lives lost, entangled in whatever dark history this place held. Tom's stomach flipped, a wave of nausea crashing over him as he stumbled backward, the laughter fading into a whisper carried by the wind. "Join us, please," the voices called, now blended into one, each syllable curling and twisting in a way only nightmares could manifest. Sweat dripped down his neck, his brain racing with desperate thoughts of escape, but the ground beneath felt alive, pulsating as if it shared an unholy consciousness with the shadows surrounding him. His feet moved instinctively, retracing his steps, but falling into the very trap he had been so cautious to avoid. The laughter crescendoed, filled with an exhilarating joy that twisted and clawed at his sanity, mixing pleasure and dread into a potent brew of fear. Just when he thought he could gather himself and run, a figure drifted from the depths of the trees, stepping into the dim light like a wraith summoned from the abyss. It was a girl, no, a silhouette of what once might have been a girl. Her eyes were hollow voids, empty and dark, yet they glimmered with an eerie allure, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. She wore a tattered dress that fluttered in an unseen wind, as if she danced on the edge of reality itself. As she raised her arm, fingers elongated like brittle twigs, a whisper of recognition sparked within him. Memories of laughter, promises of friendship surged back, swallowing him whole. "You know me, don't you?" she asked, her voice a haunting melody that echoed through the clearing. But the words twisted in the air. They felt like a trap, a lure woven with cunning intention. Tom fought against the pull, trying to shake off the memory that tugged at his heart. "You're not her," he shouted, but doubt crept in, gnawing at him like a feral beast. The shadows thickened, swirling around her as she took another step forward, and suddenly her form began to shatter, splitting apart like a broken mirror, revealing countless reflections of herself, each one more twisted than the last. Laughter erupted again from all around, unearthly and cruel, mingled with cries of despair that cut deep, wrapping around him like barbed wire. Tom could feel the ground tremble beneath him, the ritual markings winking like living things as if reacting to the dark energy. The shadows began to stretch and writhe, breaking free from their constraints, lunging towards him with a ferocity that sent waves of panic crashing over him. He turned and ran, footsteps pounding against the hard earth, each sound swallowed by the chaos behind him. The trees seemed to close in, their branches clawing at him, wrapping around him as he ducked and dodged through the underbrush. Behind him, he heard them, those soft, giggling voices again, growing louder, closer, their glee morphing into something sinister, chanting his name as if it were a sacrament. "Tom, join us! Don't you want to play?" Every fiber of his being screamed to keep moving, darkness clawing at his heels like a ravenous beast hungry for its next meal. He burst through the line of trees, only to find himself at the edge of a small, glistening pond that seemed impossibly still. The water was dark, almost black, reflecting the moonlight like a dark mirror. Here, the whispers grew chaotic, swirling around him, filling the air with a suffocating blend of laughter and sorrow. Caught in a trance, his own reflection stared back at him, eyes wild and frightened. Yet there was something else, a flicker of something in the depths, barely discernible. Suddenly, something shifted beneath the surface, a dark shape coiling and twisting beneath the water, slowly rising like a serpent surfacing for breath. Tom staggered back, heart racing, as the entity emerged, water cascading off its form, revealing a figure that sent ice through his veins. It had the features of a long-lost friend, yet twisted, reshaped into something grotesque, the skin pallid and stretched too tight over sharp angles. The eyes were wide, shimmering like glass, vacant yet filled with an insatiable hunger that made Tom's breath hitch. "Help me, Tom," it rasped, each word a dagger. "I'm stuck here, like you could be. Join us." The air was thickening, the darkness spilling out from the trees, creeping toward him like tendrils of smoke, wrapping around his legs, pulling him closer to the water's edge. He desperately tried to pull away, but the shadows writhed and twisted, tightening their grip like a vice, dragging him toward the water. In that moment of sheer terror, Tom remembered the light that had shattered the shadows. The warmth of the memories surged anew within him, urging him to fight even harder. "No," he shouted, voice strong and resolute, feeling the power of his will rising. Taking a deep breath, he focused on the pond, on the figure emerging from the depths. "You're not real. None of this is." The creature's mouth twisted into a grin, the edges cracking like a porcelain doll breaking. With a swift movement, Tom grabbed a fistful of dirt and threw it into the air, watching as the moonlight refracted through the particles, creating a dazzling prism that exploded into brilliant shards against the darkness. He could feel the energy rippling through the ground, shaking the very fabric of the forest around him. The shadows recoiled, swirling in chaos as if physically burned by the light. The figure in the water thrashed, uncoiling in desperation as bubbles erupted around it, its face contorting between recognition and rage. "No, Tom, you must stay." But Tom thrust his hand forward, casting the shadows away like a shield against the suffocating pressure. As the darkness pulled
back, he lunged forward, recognizing that the only way out was to plunge into the depths of the pond, to face the very nightmare that sought to claim him. Heart racing, he dove into the cold water, feeling it wrap around him like 1,000 fingers reaching for his soul, dragging him down into the abyss, where the laughter turned into screams, where the cool darkness allowed no warmth, no light. But as he sank deeper, memories flowed with him, wrapping their tendrils around his heart, guiding him through the pitch-black void. "You belong to the light, Tom," they whispered through waves of cold. He steadied himself, feeling each heartbeat surge with defiance as he searched the murky depths for a way forward. The darkness pulsed like a living thing, closing in around him, but he pushed through, desperate to reach the surface. A flicker of hope ignited as he found something solid beneath his hand, a strange stone that seemed to pulse with warmth, radiating a glow that distanced him from the encroaching shadows. "We are here," the voices wailed, twisting and turning, tugging at his consciousness, vowing that he would never escape. Fueled with determination, Tom grasped the stone tighter, letting its warmth ground him, become a beacon in the darkness. As he swam upward, he could feel the shadows closing in, their frigid breaths brushing against him, whispering promises of peace if only he would stop fighting. But he knew if he did, he would be lost forever. He broke the surface, gasping for air, the moonlight flooding his vision, filling his lungs with light. The pond shimmered around him, transforming the night into a landscape of fractured beauty. Tom flinging himself toward the bank with every ounce of strength he had left, his heart roaring in his ears, the whispers fading into a cacophony of anguish and cruel laughter. He scrambled to pull himself onto the ground, the warmth of the earth grounding him, still illuminated by the eerie glow of the stone held tightly in his grip. The forest quivered around him, shadows retreated, fear rippling through their form as dawn began to tinge the sky with soft light. But he knew it wasn't over yet. From the clearing, The silhouettes shifted and writhed, waiting for a moment when the darkness could reclaim its hold. Tom could still hear their calls, echoing softly through the trees, desperate and hungry. "You can't escape us, Tom. You'll always be one of us." Determined not to be lost to their grasp, Tom stood, heart pounding fiercely, as he gazed into the stillness of the thick woods ahead. Dark energy still pulsed around him, but now he carried the warmth of the stone, a flicker of hope in an expanse of shadows. It was time to face the heart of the forest, time to confront whatever dwelled within, holding dark secrets and fears that wrapped around his childhood memories like chains. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The air felt thick like a heavy blanket wrapped around him, each breath a struggle against the oppressive atmosphere. Shadows slithered between the trees, their shapes flickering and distorting under his gaze. The eerie quiet was shattered by the sound of grinding branches and rustling leaves, as if something unseen was watching him from the darkened depths of the forest. Tom's heart raced, the warmth of the stone in his pocket almost like a pulse against his skin, a reminder that he was still alive. But with each step deeper into the woods, an overwhelming sense of dread crept in, filling him with the sinking realization that he wasn't alone. Whispers danced just beyond the reach of understanding, fluttering like moths around a dim flame, taunting and teasing, each syllable laced with malice. "Join us," they echoed, merging with the rustling leaves, becoming a haunting lullaby that reverberated in his bones. Anxiety spiraled within him, yet he pressed on, determined to confront the source of the shadows that had haunted his nights. Nightmarish visions flickered at the edges of his mind, each one more terrifying than the last, a glimpse of familiar faces twisted into grotesque masks of laughter and agony. He could see crucifixes made of jagged branches strewn across the path, once symbols of safety now warped, splintered relics of a forgotten sanctuary. Each crucifix seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if they were alive and aware, silently watching his every move. As he walked, he noticed the ground beneath him changing, the soft earth giving way to sharp stones that dug cruelly into his feet. With every step, he felt like he was sinking deeper into a waking nightmare. An unsettling chill slithered down his spine, prickling the back of his neck, raising the fine hairs across his arms. There was a scent in the air, heavy and rancid, like decay mingled with the sweetness of rot. Suddenly, the laughter erupted again, rippling through the trees, echoing like a chorus of phantoms. It was louder this time, a cacophony of voices that twisted and morphed, indistinguishable yet eerily familiar. Voices that used to bring him comfort now transformed into a nightmarish symphony. Without warning, a figure burst from the underbrush to his left. A gaunt, hollow-eyed creature lunged at him, its skeletal fingers reaching out, grasping at the air as if trying to snatch away his light. Tom stumbled backward, heart pounding furiously as he tried to look away, not wanting to acknowledge the horror before him. It wore a face he almost recognized, that of a schoolmate who had gone missing years ago, a memory lost beneath layers of mundane life. Her mouth opened wide in a silent scream, yet no sound emerged save for the wailing whispers of the forest. With a sudden movement, she pointed a long, crooked finger toward the shadows, urging him to look further into the abyss. Shaking with fear, Tom forced himself to turn his gaze. The darkness seemed to shift and twist, revealing a path that wasn't there moments before. The ground itself writhed, roots wriggling like serpents eager to snatch him down into the depths of the earth. He could feel the very trees leaning closer, their gnarled branches curling toward him as if to catch him in an unyielding grip. Compelled by that haunting nod of recognition from the figment of his past, he stepped further into the opening. The air became thick with an electric tension, every step echoing like a heartbeat in the void. The whispers intensified, swirling around him in a frenzy, filling his mind with chaotic images of shadowy figures, disembodied laughter, and familiar faces fading in and out, pleading for help and warning him in the same breath. It felt as if the forest itself was alive, breathing, undulating with a twisted consciousness that seeped into him. He halted, feeling as though he had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. Just in that moment, the whispers coalesced into a single, familiar voice, soft yet cutting through the confusion like a sharpened blade. "Tom, help us." A cold sweat dripped down his back. He didn't want to help, he wanted to escape. But the stone pulsed softly against his chest, urging him forward, pulling him deeper into a vortex of shadows that wrapped around him like a shroud. The trees began to thin, revealing an open clearing where moonlight spilled in, illuminating a sinister scene that froze him in his tracks. A circle of figures danced in the center, their faces obscured by hoods, obscuring all identity. They moved in a frenzied rhythm, chanting low and unending, swaying as if entranced. An altar, rough and uneven, centered the clearing, draped in a shroud that glistened with a sheen of dark liquid that pooled on the ground, reflecting the moon like a monstrous mirror. It pulsed with a life of its own, beating steadily in time with the rhythm of the dancers. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he registered the altar's offering, bones scattered like discarded toys, remnants of past lives drifted upon the floor. It was a grave more gruesome than he could have imagined, one that had been hidden in the recesses of his fears. The figure he had seen earlier vanished from his mind, replaced by the faces of mangled friendships, visioned in the twisted underbelly of this ceremony. As he stood frozen, he felt it, the eye of the forest resting upon him, watching, waiting for him to make his move. The dance paused, and for a heartbeat, silence ensued, thick and suffocating. The hooded figures turned toward him, faces concealed but their intent palpable, a perfect synchrony of malevolence. An unseen leader stepped forward, face emerging from shadow. It was a visage he recognized too well, a twinned reflection of himself, warped and grotesque, the very embodiment of his darkest fears. "You've come home, Tom," the doppelganger whispered, a voice dripping with temptation and malice. "You belong with us now." The ground trembled, and shadows surged in closer, eager to envelop him, pulling at his limbs with insistent whispers. It felt like gravity shifting around him, encouraging him to surrender. All of it was too much. Voices clamored in his ears, urging his decision, feeding on his desperation. Clenching the stone in his pocket, Tom felt a surge of anger. No, he wouldn't be claimed, not by this nightmare, not by the echoes of the past. With one last, defiant thought, he turned and ran, teeth clenched against the chaos, ignoring the cries that beckoned him to return, listening only to the pounding of his heart, drowning out the cruel laughter that chased him through the trees. The figures followed, a horde of darkness, rooting for a surrender, growing incoherent in their frenzy. Tom dashed back toward the pond, the ground shifting beneath him as if the forest was alive, eager to drag him down once more. The trees pressed in, branches reaching out, threatening to snare him, but he pushed forward, breathless, desperate for the taste of freedom. As he broke through the last line of trees, he could see the water glimmering under the moonlight, and for a moment, it felt like a haven. But he knew it wasn't over. He had awakened something dark and ancient. The shadows would not be so easily dismissed. As he plunged into the water, he felt the familiar chill encircle him, but now it was laced with danger, that beckoning force pulling him down deeper, tempting him to surrender. Bubbles escaped his lips as he fought to keep his head above water, determined to resist their relentless grasp. The moon seemed to grow dimmer, the light fading as he sank deeper into the abyss, darkness wrapping around him like a cocoon. His fingers brushed against the pulsating stone in his pocket, warmth radiating as if it sensed his struggle. He could feel the pull of the shadows, thrumming beneath him, their whispers entwining with the murmur of the water, a relentless tide pulling him into a dark embrace. "Tom, come home." He clawed at the surface, fighting against the iron grip of despair that sought to drag him into the depths. The surface shimmered above, a distant promise of escape, but as he thrashed and kicked, that surface seemed to pull away, like a mirage fleeing his grasp. The whispered promises of peace filled his ears, coaxing him into submission, each syllable laced with cruel laughter that echoed through the depths like a haunting refrain. You are one of us, you can never escape. But just as darkness threatened to conquer him entirely, the stone ignited, flooding the water with a radiant light, momentarily scattering the shadows that clung to him. Tom gasped for air, and in that desperate moment, he felt the pulse of the stone resonate through his veins, filling him with clarity and determination. No, he shouted against the tide, forcing the word from his lungs. I will not be lost to you. With renewed vigor, he kicked and clawed his way toward the light above, feeling the shadows recoil, their whispers fading as he surged upward, breaking through the surface once more. He gasped, filling his lungs with the cool night air, and as he glanced around, the forest stood silent once more, shadows retreating into the trees, watching with a hunger that sent a chill through his bones. But as he pushed himself onto the bank, he noticed something unsettling. The clearing was no longer empty. The hooded figures, those silhouettes of dread, stood at the edge of the treeline, their eyes gleaming with a predatory glow. Their dance had shifted, now a low, haunting chant that vibrated in his bones, echoing promises of torment that turned his blood to ice. Without hesitation, Tom turned to flee but found the path behind him winding impossibly, twisting against his will, the shadows reaching out as if to embrace him in a cold, unyielding grasp. Each step felt like wading through syrup, thick and heavy, as he strained against the suffocating darkness pressing dangerously close. Join us, they called, voices rising in a chilling crescendo, filling the air with a sense of impending doom that threatened to crush his very spirit. The moon hung low and heavy above, offering little comfort as his heart thundered, the only sound in the unnatural stillness encasing him. And as he ran, he realized the forest was changing, branches warped into hands, grabbing at him, desperately trying to pull him back into its depths. The familiar figures began to morph, shifting into monstrous versions of those he once knew, their features twisting and contorting into nightmarish mockeries. Each face sent waves of terror crashing over him as he stumbled forward, nearly losing his grip on reality, every step feeling heavier than the last. Finally, he burst into another clearing, breathless and desperate. But it was a trap. Before him lay the remnants of an ancient shrine, covered in a thick layer of fog that twisted like phantom hands reaching for him. Stone roots snaked upward, breaking through the ground, forming a grotesque throne at the center, upon which a blackened, withered form sat, eyes like coals smoldering with an otherworldly fire. The seeker returns, it rasped, voice like gravel breaking underfoot, emanating an air of twisted authority. Tom staggered back, a wave of nausea washing over him as the thing spoke. Her mouth did not move, yet he could feel the words sinking into the very marrow of his bones, lacing around his heart like iron chains. A sickening sensation knotted in his gut as the figure raised a skeletal hand, and shadows swirled around him, enveloping him once more in a cocoon of darkness. You have come seeking, it continued, each word dripping with mockery. But the forest gives. What will you offer in return? Tom's mind raced, uncertainty flooding his senses. The echoes of laughter and pleas surrounded him, blurring the line between friend and foe, reality and nightmare. You must sacrifice to break the chain, the withered figure pressed, illuminating the air around Tom with a sickly glow. What will you sacrifice? Tom looked around, the twisted remnants of what had been there looming large. Nothing felt right anymore. Friends and promises flashed before him in a chaotic series of quick cuts, a past intertwined with an inevitable horror he'd never known was lurking beneath the surface of his memory. Would he be forced to betray the very essence of his being? Would he have to face his greatest fears to escape this waking nightmare? With a spark of rebellion flooding his spirit, he clenched the stone tightly, grasping its warmth, trying to slow the rush of frantic thoughts. I'll make no sacrifice, he shouted defiantly, voice mingling with the crashing waves of fear. The shadows recoiled for a split second, giving him a surge of hope as the darkness wavered. He felt a sudden shift within. A realization ignited deep within him. The true darkness lies not in the forest, but within his own heart, his regrets, his failures. These were the chains that bound him tighter than any physical grasp. In that moment of clarity, Tom understood that his struggle wasn't just against the shadows or the twisted figures that sought to claim him. It was a battle to reclaim his own soul, to confront the weight of his decisions, the shadows of his past lingering like ghosts, waiting patiently for him to crack open the door of despair. With each heartbeat, the withered figure's grin widened, revealing yellowed teeth that glistened with anticipation. No sacrifice? You think you can escape, little one, it hissed, and the shadows around him responded, rippling like a dark tide, eager to swallow him whole. Dread settled over Tom, like a heavy fog seeping into the cracks of his resolve. It pressed against him, urging him to falter, to cower. But another flicker of determination ignited within him. He wouldn't give in to fear. He thrust his hands forward, the stone pulsing with energy, radiating warmth that pushed against the encroaching darkness. "I will not be your pawn," he declared, voice trembling yet fierce. The shadows recoiled as if stung, swirling back to regroup, forming a dense barrier around the figure, who watched with simmering rage. The forest trembled, its very essence trembling in response to the clash of wills. Suddenly, the trees quivered, branches slashing like claws in the wind, scraping against one another. An eerie whisper began to crescendo, growing louder until it became a cacophony of sorrowful wails, voices lost in time that reverberated through the earth. They were the souls of the forest, lost, trapped, their own sacrifices echoing in this place of ancient power. Tom could feel their pain, the heavy burden of despair washing over him, threatening to drag him down into their eternal sorrow. "You'll join them soon enough." The figure's voice slithered through the air, a poisonous caress. What's one more soul amongst the countless others? Tom forced himself to breathe, to focus on the energy of the stone, absorbing its glow into his being. "No," he shouted again, feeling the vibrations of his voice chase the shadows away like a gust of wind. Each word sharpened his resolve, slicing through the oppression that threatened to engulf him. In the silence that followed, the atmosphere shifted. An unnatural stillness flooded the woods, and for a moment, he thought he could feel the forest holding its breath, waiting. But that fleeting moment of calm shattered like glass as a monstrous howl erupted from behind him, ripping through the tranquility like razor-sharp claws. He turned, dread seeping into his bones as he faced the source. Emerging from behind the trees was a creature that defied all logic, a grotesque mix of human and beast. Its eyes glowed with primal fury, teeth elongated into vicious fangs. Every feature twisted, mimicking the faces of people he'd once known, all thrown together to create a nightmare before him. It lunged, a blur of shadow and sinew, knocking him back to the ground. The chill of its breath felt like ice seeping into his very core, dragging him into an abyss of darkness. As he grappled, he caught a glimpse of the altar, bones stacked haphazardly, a grotesque testament to the forest's midnight history, each fragment telling tales of lost souls who had fallen prey to the lurking horrors. The creature reared back, lunging again with rage-filled eyes that demanded surrender. Tom's instincts kicked in. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. In the process, he stumbled onto the altar, grasping a bone, cold and brittle like the memories it harbored. A surge of power shot through him, the stone in his pocket flaring in response to the sacrificial relic. Images flooded his mind, echoes of the past gnawing at his conscience. He saw friends long lost, laughter turned to screams, visions of the moments he had turned away when he could have acted, when he should have fought. The realization was suffocating, each face a reminder of what stood at stake. Slipping back to his feet, he faced the beast again, his heart pounding like a war drum. Positions shifted as he clutched the bone tight. In that eerie stillness, time stretched as the creature readied itself for another strike, muscles coiling like springs, rage emanating in waves. Tom felt the air crackle with energy, the stone thrumming in sync with the pulsing dread around him. And then something shifted within him. A flicker of bravery sparked anew. "I will not succumb," he yelled, channeling his fear into a blinding light that radiated from the stone, illuminating the shadows attempting to overtake him. The bone vibrated in his grasp, and as he thrust it forward in a desperate arc, the light burst free, cascading like a wildfire against the encroaching darkness. The beast let out a deafening roar as the light connected, momentarily stunned. The twisted forms of his friends imprisoned within its glow floated in the air like specters. They reached out, mouths moved in a soundless plea, their eyes reflecting the agony of their fates. Tom grasped the connection, felt their pain, and in that moment of clarity, he understood. This wasn't just a fight for his life, but for all those consumed by the forest's hunger. Fueled by an unquenchable desire to save them, he pushed deeper into the light, slowly pulling in the shadows, the darkness beginning to unravel, breaking like glass splintering under pressure. With a sudden burst, the width of his determination surged, and the shadows screamed, clawing against the blinding force, desperate to escape the light's embrace. Tom felt the connection to the altar strengthen as fragments of his memories coalesced. He would not only reclaim himself, but set them free too. The weight of his past decisions transformed into a beacon of hope, each reflection giving life to a chant he didn't know he could summon. "You are not alone," he cried out, the energy manifesting as a pulse, a heartbeat in sync with the forest. But the darkness roared back, furious at his defiance, and from the depths of the shadows rose figures twisted and deformed, each a grotesque reflection of what once was. They swirled around him, fingers like wisps of smoke curling into claws, whispering sweet nothings steeped in despair, echoing doubts that threatened to consume him. "You think this will save you," they taunted in unison, their voices a symphony of malice. Tom staggered, the cacophony seeping into his thoughts, a tempest of doubts crashing against his resolve. Each syllable was a thorn, a styled reminder of every moment he had let fear rule him. "You are nothing without us." Rage ignited in his chest, pushing through the despair. With every ounce of strength, he lifted the bone high, calling upon the power of the stone woven through his very being. "I am not nothing," he roared, his voice cutting through their poisonous chuckles. The light blazed forth, a brilliant beam slicing through the encroaching waves of darkness as the twisted figures.
The forest itself seemed to scream. A horrible shriek ripped through the air, an eerie cacophony that vibrated in his bones, shaking the trees to their core. The shadows recoiled, twisting and writhing, their forms becoming grotesque caricatures of the friends he once knew. Eyes rolled back in their sockets, mouths contorting into rictus grins, and limbs stretching unnaturally, reaching for him in a dark parody of companionship. "We can be whole again," they wailed, their voices merging into a malevolent symphony. Tom could feel their anguish, their desires clawing at his mind. The warmth of the light felt distant, flickering like a candle in a tempest. But he could not falter now. He felt the wood beneath his feet splinter, the altar's power flickering. Panic seeped into every inch of his being as the forest continued to churn, the dark energy rising like smoke, wrapping around him tighter, squeezing the hope from his heart. Suddenly, the shadows began to amalgamate, twisting into a massive form that towered above him, a grotesque replica of himself. Eyes full of malice, features a mockery of his own. "You are one of us now," the dark doppelganger hissed, voice dripping with venom, echoing in the grove like an evil incantation. "Embrace your true self." With every breath, Tom felt the pull, the dread seeping deeper into his soul. The creature's eyes shone with a cold, terrible light, and he could feel the despair eating away at him, clawing into the very essence of who he was. Meanwhile, the forest had transformed into something else entirely. Twisted branches, gnarled roots, and branches pushing upwards warped into claw-like hands, reaching for him, trying to drag him down into the depths of darkness. "No!" he screamed, thrusting the bone forward, grounding himself in the light. "I am not you." The bone caught fire, igniting with a luminescent glow as Tom forced the darkness back, wielding it like a weapon. A shockwave of pure energy erupted from him, a blinding light that caused the shadowy figure to recoil in agony. The forest twisted under the pressure, the air shattered with the clash of light and dark, rippling through the trees like a fever dream. As the shadows screamed, they split and ripped apart, leaving behind grotesque remnants that faded into the night, their wails resonating like echoes of lost souls. Tom felt the battle within himself sharpen into focus. As the tormented faces of his friends flickered in and out, he reached deep inside, reconnecting with the very core of who he truly was. Memories flowed within him like a river, strokes of laughter dancing in the spaces where panic had taken hold. "I choose love," he proclaimed, the power of his declaration rumbling through the grove like thunder rolling across the sky. "I choose life." As he stomped his foot into the ground, a brilliant light surged, merging with the bone and filling the forest with a golden hue. The shadows screeched and writhed, their forms melting away, leaving only echoes of their agony behind as the forest slowly began to return to its natural state, light breaking where darkness had ruled. But even as Tom felt a surge of triumph, he looked down to see half-formed hands rising from beneath the earth, clawing at him in desperation. They emerged slowly, faces of forgotten friends still twisted and anguished. "Save us, Tom," they cried, their voices almost begging, dripping with despair. As the light began to dim, he realized the forest wasn't finished with him yet. Something vile lingered in the air, filling his lungs with dread. The regret and fear of those trapped in the shadows swirled around him, each a ghostly reminder of what he might lose forever. The realization pounded on his heart. He couldn't leave them behind. "No," he yelled, his heart pounding in protest. "I won't abandon you." As he took a step forward, the shadowy forms surged, the cries of his friends rising into a haunting wail that wrapped around him like chains. The more he fought, the stronger they grew, pulling him back into the darkness where their pain thrived. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed, and the shadows rushed closer. They whispered promises, sweet phrases tinged with recrimination. "Come, Tom, rest with us." They beckoned, "Join us and be free." The warmth of hope felt like a distant star, barely visible against the expanding horizon of despair. Desperation clawed at him, and he could feel the weight of loneliness crashing down like a wave. And as Tom looked into their eyes, searching for the flicker of the friends he once knew, he suddenly felt a small glimmer of light within himself, a reminder of the love that once filled their hearts. He clutched the bone tightly, breathing deeply, drawing strength from the warmth of his memories. "I am not afraid of the dark," he whispered, rising to his feet again, determination burning fiercely. The shadows recoiled, but he pressed forward, fueled by the strength of the love he held. He could see their faces now, familiar and bright, like beacons glimmering in the night, each one a fragment of joy and laughter locked away. "I set you free," he shouted, the bone resonating with a vibrant energy that pulsed through him and into the earth. The ground shook violently as his voice echoed through the forest, breaking the silence, freeing the lost souls trapped in the shadows. As bright bursts of light began to surge from the bone, the faces of his friends began to transform, twists of sorrow unfurling into relief. Their anguished expressions softened, returning to the joy he remembered, filling the space around him with warmth. The shadows screamed once more, a horrible cacophony of loss and fury, but Tom faced them head-on. The faces of his friends screamed through the darkness, vibrant with essence and hope, and just as the shadows lunged to reclaim what they had lost, he felt their hands grab his. In that millisecond, their light exploded outward, entwining with the bone, merging with him, pushing the darkness back into the abyss. He felt enveloped in their collective strength, courage emanating from them like a radiant blaze, forcing the shadows back as the trees trembled with liberation. And that moment stretched on, time and space distorting as the shadows began to dissolve, transformed by the unyielding light that engulfed the forest. The cries of despair morphed into laughter, vibrant and joyous, echoing through the woods as the darkness retreated, pulled back into the void from which it came. But just when he thought he had won, he heard a low growl emanate from the depths of the forest, deep and rumbling, the final vestige of the darkness clawing back, refusing to relinquish its hold. The form of the original shadowy figure re-emerged, monstrous and defiant, ink-black eyes glinting with malice. A towering figure of pure malevolence, embodying every fear and regret Tom had ever harbored. "You think you can escape me?" it hissed, voice smooth and cold like ice. "I am the part of you that you can never escape." In the heat of the moment, Tom felt the ground tremble again, a reaction of the darkness trying to reclaim its power. The shadows flickered and lashed out, desperate to latch onto his spirit. He could feel the very foundations of his being crack under the pressure, a suffocating grip wrapping around his throat. "You don't understand," he screamed, the force of his own past colliding with the light. "I am stronger than you." With all the strength he could muster, he advanced toward the monster, bone raised high. "I will not be your prisoner." The two forces clashed one final time. A cataclysm of light and darkness that resonated through the trees, shaking the ground to splinters. The air erupted with energy, a surge of freedom and heartbreak, as Tom fought against the shadow that threatened to claim him once and for all. Then, with one last desperate thrust, he slammed the bone into the earth, the very ground shattering under the sheer force of his will. The forest erupted in a blinding light, and as the radiant energy enveloped him, he felt everything shift and change, the colors blending together like a canvas caught in a storm. In that moment of despair, the shadows screamed, their cries cutting into the night, but the warmth began to push through, fierce and alive. Tom was surrounded by laughter, the whispers of his friends' joy breaking free, illuminating the darkness they had all fought against. He could feel the darkness splintering, the very essence of fear cracking beneath the weight of the light as it burst forth from him like a sunrise, chasing away the remnants of despair. And for a heartbeat, it seemed the world held its breath as the forces collided, the power of hope crashing against the shadows, bouncing back into the void. Then the scream echoed, piercing through all that confronted him, a dark promise that reverberated in his mind. "You will never truly be free." Tom braced himself, ready to fight, knowing that even if he won tonight, dark tendrils would always lurk in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. But with the love he felt surrounding him, he finally realized the monsters didn't belong to him anymore. As the last shadow dissipated, the forest began to wake. The air thinned, the branches curling, whispering secrets from ages past, urging him on. The path ahead felt uncertain, but he was no longer afraid. With the echoes of his friends by his side, he stepped into the light, ready to embrace whatever lay beyond, knowing the journey was far from over. But even then, somewhere in the growing darkness, a whisper slithered through the trees, chilling his blood. "You can never escape your shadows, Tom," it taunted, a reminder of the battle that would continue to unfold. A haunting echo that promised he would confront the darkness once more. Tom swallowed hard, determination against the creeping chill in his spine. No matter where he went, the shadows would hopefully chase him, but he wouldn't let fear take hold. He took a deep breath and set forth into the depths of the forest, ready to illuminate the darkness lurking ahead, knowing with each step the shadows wouldn't win. Not this time. Tom stepped cautiously into the overgrown path, the air thick with whispers that seemed to carry his name. The trees closed in around him, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers trying to snatch him back into the shadows from which he had just escaped. The sunlight flickered sporadically, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and flickered with every rustle of the wind. He shuddered as he recalled the faces of his friends, those lost souls staring out from the darkness, twisted and tormented. The love he had felt moments ago began to wane, eclipsed by the dread creeping into his heart. Each step felt heavier, like the forest itself was pulling him down, trying to suffocate his hope. And then he heard it, the soft, dragging sound of something moving behind him. His heart raced as he turned, but there was nothing, just the trees swaying, as if mocking his fear, the underbrush rustling in a way that seemed almost alive. The feeling of being watched seeped into his bones. Breathing laboriously, he pressed on, glancing over his shoulder every few steps, half expecting to see a dark figure lurking just out of sight. The shadows deepened as he ventured further, and the temperature dropped. A chill wrapped around his spine. Suddenly, he spotted something unusual at the base of an ancient oak. A small, twisted doll, its porcelain face cracked and its glassy eyes staring blankly at him. He knelt down cautiously, feeling an inexplicable pull to examine this unsettling artifact. As he reached out to touch it, the moment his fingers brushed against the cold surface, he heard a soft giggle, a sound so childlike and sweet it felt utterly wrong in this place. The laughter echoed around him, bouncing off the trees and fading into silence just as quickly, leaving an eerie void that thickened the air. Feeling a tingle of dread, Tom yanked his hand back, a shiver rippling through him. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath, glancing back at the doll, which now seemed to lean towards him, its smile widening in a way that twisted the pit of his stomach. Suddenly, branches creaked ominously overhead, a warning he couldn't ignore. He felt the weight of the forest pressing down, like it was alive, breathing, and hungry. Without thinking, Tom stumbled away from the doll, pushing through the brambles that snagged at his clothes. The laughter returned, this time louder, a cacophony of childish mirth that echoed through the trees, ringing in his ears in a maddening way. It was a sound that wasn't just playful. It was mocking, taunting him as if it manifested from shadows wishing to see him crumble. A flash of movement caught his eye, brief, fleeting, just beyond the tree-line. He squinted into the growing dusk, panic creeping like fog into his senses. What had he seen? He could almost make out a shape, a silhouette that seemed to flit between the trees, humming a soft tune, low and discordant, sending nauseating whispers through his mind. Desperate to escape, Tom quickened his pace, breaking into a run. He felt branches whip against his skin, sharp as knives, and the laughter grew louder, harmonizing into an unsettling chorus that clawed at the back of his skull. The world around him twisted, colors blending into a smear of black and gray, the shadows stretching unnaturally as if they were reaching for him, wanting to pull him down into the void. Then he stumbled onto a clearing. Moonlight shone down like a spotlight, revealing the remnants of an old campsite, its fire pit cold and overgrown with weeds. Just beyond, a circle of stones jutted from the ground, worn and ancient, each inscribed with strange symbols that pulsed faintly, almost as if they were alive. He hesitated, his instincts screaming for him to turn back, but curiosity fought against his fear. As he drew closer, a deep humming emanated from the stones, a resonance that vibrated through his body, mixing with the sound of the laughter that surrounded him, creating a symphony of dread. He could feel the air thickening, as if it was charged with something sinister, something waiting to pounce. Suddenly the laughter stopped, plunging everything into a heavy silence that was suffocating. The only sound left was the pounding of his heart echoing in his ears. The moment stretched, an eternity of dread. A shiver crawled down his spine as he felt the weight of many eyes watching him from the darkened edges of the trees. "What do you want?" he shouted into the void, his voice trembling. But there was no answer, only the rustle of leaves and the faintest whisper of his name, drawing closer and closer, wrapping around him. Tom, join us!" Instinct kicked in, and he spun around to run, but the forest was a maze, branches tightening around him like a vice. Panic clawed at his chest as he realized he was lost deep in the woods. The deeper he ran, the more disoriented he became. He could feel the pull of those cursed stones behind him, their ancient magic gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. Just when he thought he might break free, he abruptly halted at the sight of another figure standing in his path. It was a girl, her long hair hanging in dirty strands, her dress torn and soiled. She looked like one of the lost souls, and when her eyes met his, he felt the air freeze around him. Thin tears of ash smeared her face, marking her cheeks in heartbreaking patterns, and her lips curled into a smile that held no joy. "Help me," she whispered, the words dripping with desperation and dread. But something in her gaze chilled him to his core. The emptiness, as if she were a mere shell, a vessel of the shadows that now twisted around them. He found himself stepping backward, but her hand shot out, the grip cold and vice-like as it wrapped around his wrist. "Don't run. Stay with me." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the force of her presence was overwhelming. Before he could think, a shadow shifted near her feet, swirling and contorting, like smoke curling in the night. It rose up, encircling her, and Tom felt an icy grasp around his own heart, as if he were about to be pulled into the depths of her despair. And then, from the darkness, he heard it again, the giggling, intermingling with the hum from the stones, forming a haunting melody that echoed through the air as the forest swayed. Staring into the depths of her eyes, he saw flickers of the joy she must have once known, now replaced by something dark and anguished. It struck him then that she wasn't lost. She was a guardian of this place, a keeper of the shadows, forever trapped, holding him in her ghostly embrace. The moment stretched again, heavy with the gravity of his choices. The shadows surged around him, creeping higher, a thick mist rising up until he could no longer see the ground beneath his feet. He was being enveloped, pulled deeper into their world, the oppressive air swallowing everything in a consuming darkness. Tom couldn't breathe. He felt the breath of the shadows whispering promises of despair, each syllable a claw digging into his mind, urging him to give in, to succumb to the despair that threatened to claim him. Each heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the laughter, each pulse beckoning him to join the revelry of the forsaken. "Stay with us, Tom," the girl echoed again, and he felt the edges of his resolve cracking. Just as he thought he would break, he remembered the warmth of his friends, the love that had surged through him, pushing the shadows away. With a sudden burst of clarity, he shook off her hold, breaking free from the grasp of the forest. With renewed strength, he ran, weaving through the trees, ignoring the fading whispers that turned into screams behind him. Branches lashed at him. The shadows writhed and screamed, clawing at his back, desperate to drag him down. Tom dashed toward the heartbeat of the woods, trusting his instincts, pressing forward into the unknown. As the laughter faded and the shadows began to retreat, he burst into another clearing, breathless and wild with fear. This one was different. It was lined with twisted trees, their bark dark like coal, and at the center lay an altar, slick with moss and shadow. He approached cautiously, awareness prickling down his spine, and froze as he spotted something atop the altar, a heart, crimson and pulsing, as if it were alive. It throbbed gently, sending ripples through the air, and the shadows began coiling around it, crawling forward as though they were drawn by its very essence, eager to devour its warmth. His pulse quickened as he saw the sharp blades of bone surrounding it like a crown, glinting dimly in the faint moonlight. The heart seemed to pulse with an intoxicating power, and instead of fear, he felt a wild curiosity swell within him, a connection that felt unshakable, as if it were calling him by name. Suddenly, a voice resonated in his mind, the truth being whispered through the shadows, intertwined with the heartbeat of the forest. "Consume it, and you will take control of the darkness." He wavered, uncertainty clawing at him. This was what the whispers had hinted at, the path to power. He could be the one to conquer the shadows, to bring light to the darkness dwelling within. But at what cost? What price would this ancient forest demand? Tom took a step forward, every instinct urging him to touch it, to grasp it and claim it as his own. But then he remembered the lost souls, the ones who had succumbed before him, those who had fought the shadows and lost themselves. Would he become another whisper in the dark? Tom hesitated, the heart flickering with a soft glow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own, each beat resonating with an unsettling allure. Shadows danced around him, swirling like a mist, whispering secrets that clawed at his sanity. He could feel their hunger, their desire clawing at his skin, urging him closer, promising power, control, and the ability to escape the grasp of fear that tightened around him. The wind shifted suddenly, a cold gust that carried a warning, rustling the leaves and making them chatter like frightened specters. He shook his head, trying to quell the rising panic that threatened to erupt from deep within. Just then, a low rumble echoed through the clearing, causing the trees to shudder and the ground beneath him to tremble, as if acknowledging a presence that lingered just beyond his sight. Tom instinctively took a step back, scanning the shadows, feeling something stir just out of view. A voice, low and gravelly, seeped into his consciousness. The forest was alive, its breath thick with an ancient malice. "You belong to us now," it murmured, and the words hung heavy in the air, curling around him like vines ready to ensnare. In that moment of uncertainty, the heart pulsed harder, its rhythm echoing in sync with his own terrified heartbeat. Suddenly, the shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing, creeping and shifting like dark tendrils, coiling tighter as they emanated a creeping dread. Slowly, figures began to emerge from the gloom, their features obscured, bodies warped and blurred, resembling a distorted reflection of lost souls etched in agony. Some wore faces he almost recognized, friends, family, their eyes sunken, devoid of light, their mouths twisted into silent screams rippling through the cold air. Before he could react, the figures lunged forward, their movements fluid and unnatural. Tom froze, paralyzed by the sight of them, grotesquely lifelike yet grotesquely twisted, coming closer and closer. They reached for him with claw-like hands, their fingers elongated, nails like shards of ice, glistening ominously in the glimmer of the heart's glow. "Join us, Tom," they beckoned in perfect unison, their voices a haunting melody of sorrow and despair, a symphony of the forgotten claiming him. Cold dread settled in the pit of his stomach as he felt himself slipping, losing grip on his reality. Gritting his teeth, he broke free from the paralysis, spinning away from the figures as their hands grasped for him, fingers just brushing the fabric of his shirt. Heart pounding in his chest, he glanced back at the heart, which now glowed brighter, illuminating the clearing with a blood-red hue, distorting the shadows into a grotesque dance of agony. Each pulse was a call to darkness, drawing him in, taunting him with visions of power that twisted like a serpent in his mind. The forest snarled around him, branches arching over his head, trapping him within this nightmare that promised both doom and dominion. He stumbled into the dense thicket, desperate to escape, but the laughter returned, echoing more sinister than before, filling the air with a sense of impending dread. It wasn't just the shadows seeking him. It was as if the forest itself had come alive, every rustle and creak a reminder of its presence. His heart raced as he felt the ground give way, roots breaking the surface and reaching up like skeletal hands, grasping at his ankles, pulling him towards the darkness that lurked beneath. "Fight it!" he shouted into the encroaching gloom, desperation tinging his voice, yet it rang hollow against the cacophony of despair surrounding him. Shadows swirled tighter, pulling the laughing figures at him, faces shifting from despair to mockery, eyes gleaming with malice as they reached out, fingers curling towards him, whispering promises of darkness. "You're one of us, Tom. You can't escape." Everything felt unreal, like a horrific dream, pulling him deeper into a consuming abyss. Just then, a piercing scream tore through the air, shattering the steady rhythm of laughter. It was a sound that sent chills racing down his spine, a cry laden with pure terror. Suddenly, the figures stopped, their attention diverted, their heads snapping towards the edge of the clearing as if sensing something more sinister brewing. The shadows thickened, swirling violently as a storm began to gather, but this was no natural force. The heartbeat of the heart grew frantic, matching the growing tumult. Out of the darkness, a shape emerged, massive and monstrous. Tom's breath hitched as he beheld a creature that seemed to embody the very essence of fear. Its skin was like charred bark, black and twisted, glistening with an unnatural sheen. Eyes like glowing coals burned into the night, filled with rage and ancient hunger. Teeth like jagged blades clicked together, echoing like thunder in the stillness. It let out a roar that shook the very ground beneath him, primal and raw, a call to the shadows that followed it like loyal wraiths. Tom stumbled back, terror anchoring his feet to the ground as the creature stepped forward. The figures shrank back as if paying homage, their laughter fading to whispers, their form dissolving into shadows, allowing the beast to take center stage in this crucible of dread. It paused, inhaling deeply, savoring the air as though it fed off fear, vibrating with power. The shadows wrapped around it like a cloak, sheltering it within a tempest that clouded his senses. In that moment, Tom knew he had to act. The heart beat faster, almost challenging him to grasp it, to become one with its power in a desperate bid for survival. Could he turn the darkness against itself? This creature was a guardian of nightmares, and he felt a fleeting moment of clarity amidst the chaos. But as he took a step forward, the beast locked its gaze on him, the heat of its fiery eyes boring into his soul. "You're too late," it growled, voice like the grinding of stones, resonating through the clearing, making the air quiver with dread. "Welcome home, Tom." The shadows surged around him, and in an instant, everything changed. The heart pulsated violently, its glow becoming blinding, illuminating the darkness with a red light that carved through the nightmare. The clearing erupted into chaos as shadows shrieked and howled, swirling madly, and the creature lunged forward. Tom felt the darkness close in, but he was no longer afraid. He positioned himself, feeling the whispers behind him urging him to embrace the shadows. The heartbeat resonated through him, and suddenly it was a desperate struggle for dominance. He reached out, stretching his hand towards the heart, feeling its warmth, a stark contrast to the dread pooling in his veins. "I won't be your pawn," he declared, pushing away the fear that threatened to drown him, drawing upon the essence of the light that flickered within that heart. The creature reeled back, a howl escaping its throat, a sound that would haunt him forever. Shadows recoiled from him, their whispers turning frantic, the laughter dissonant and panicked. As he grasped the heart, a surge of power coursed through him, a wave of heat igniting his senses, washing away the fear until he felt alive within the darkness. He was rooted deeply, branches entwined around him, but it was different now. He wasn't lost. He summoned all he had, feeding off the fear around him, twisting it into something potent. In that cataclysmic moment, Tom unleashed a blinding pulse of light. The shadows screamed and bled into the ground, recoiling from the radiant wave that exploded from him. The forest trembled around him, the trees shaking as if trying to escape the fury. He could feel the darkness fighting back, wild and thrashing, but he held firm, pouring everything into this light, this essence that now belonged to him. The creature roared, a sound of unrelenting rage, its form flickering as the light burned holes in its essence. Tom felt his power intertwining with the heart's rhythm, a heartbeat that resonated with magic and darkness, shattering the balance that had entrapped him. He pushed harder, drawing from the depths of the shadows, commanding the darkness to submit to him. Suddenly, the world around him shattered, and he was thrust into an overwhelming void, spiraling through a vortex of light and shadow. The forest dissolved, the laughter turned to wails of despair as the shadows were torn apart by his will. And in that blinding whirlpool of chaos, Tom realized he was more than just a boy lost in the woods. He had become a force of nature, a mantle woven with both shadow and light, the very essence of the balance he had tried to escape. As the turmoil reached a crescendo, Tom opened his eyes, not to the clearing, but to an endless expanse. In one fleeting moment, he felt euphoria and dread meld into one, energy swirling like a storm that held the fate of the forest in his hands. Would he maintain this power, or would he be claimed by the darkness he had wrestled against for so long? In that eternal blink, he understood. He was now bound to this bewitched forest forever, a guardian entwined with its sorrow and strength. And as echoes of laughter turned to whispers, creeping back into existence around him. He knew the forest had an unending appetite, and voices of the past would always beckon him to join them, forever roaming between light and shadow, seeking solace in the unsettling truth of eternity. Somewhere in the wind, he heard it again. Join us, a chilling invitation, a reminder that in darkness, something would always call in the night. But this time it was different. This time, Tom smiled as he pulled the shadows closer, feeling the heartbeat of the forest sync with his own, ready to claim his new reality. Somewhere in the wind, he heard it again. Join us, a chilling invitation, a reminder that in darkness, something would always call in the night. But this time it was different. This time, Tom smiled as he pulled the shadows closer, feeling the heartbeat of the forest sync with his own, ready to claim his new reality. Yet, as the shadows enveloped him, an eerie quiet fell. The vibrant sounds of the forest faded into a deep, profound silence, so thick it felt as if the air itself had also gone still, holding its breath waiting. Tom's heart began to echo louder in his ears, each beat reverberating in the void, a steady thrum that pulsed like the heart he had just embraced. He took a cautious step forward. The ground beneath him felt like an extension of himself, the cool earth pulsing with an intangible energy. As he moved, dark tendrils rose from the ground, slithering upward like serpents, weaving around his ankles, hitching at his clothes. Instinctively, he shivered, feeling their cold touch, but he dismissed it as part of the forest's embrace. But the whispers returned, filling the stillness, rising slowly like fog creeping through the trees. They skittered along the edges of his consciousness, forming incoherent phrases that made little sense, yet felt immensely familiar, tugging at memories long buried. Come home, rest with us. And then, the bark of the trees began to twist, shifting with life, faces emerging from the knots and grooves. They looked pained, mouths opening in muted screams, pleading for release from whatever cursed existence kept them bound to this wretched place. Tom stumbled back, his breath hitching in his throat, heart racing at the grotesque sight, realizing that the faces were the remnants of those lost, those who had succumbed to the forest call. "What are you?" Tom's voice trembled as he glared at the distorted figures. They did not respond. Instead, their eyes glinted with a desperate longing, echoing the sorrow he now felt deep inside, spurring him to step closer. Just then, it happened. A deafening crash echoed through the grove, shaking the ground beneath him. It felt as if the very trees themselves were mourning. Splintering wood, snapping branches, and then silence hung heavy in the air. He turned, feeling the weight of the forest pressing in all around him. The shadows shifted, writhing in anticipation, weaving tighter around him, their caresses shifting from seductive to sinister. Then he saw it, a figure emerging from the darkness beyond the trees. Tall and thin, wearing a cloak that seemed sewn from shadows, it moved with an unnatural grace, gliding rather than walking, eyes like black holes that threatened to swallow the light. It brought with it a coldness, an energy that splintered the air with an electric tension. Tom's breath quickened as it approached, a smile spreading across its face, a grin far too wide, curling at the corners with an unnatural gleam. "So you've chosen to join us," it said, voice smooth but laced with an underlying tremor, like the rustling of dead leaves. A chorus of laughter erupted from the shadows, sending chills cascading down his spine. It felt as if the very forest mocked him, a cacophonous response to his choice. Tom's heart raced. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but that laughter was almost intoxicating, pulling him deeper into the nightmarish realm. The figure stepped closer, extending a skeletal hand toward him, the nails elongated and sharp like claws, glistening in the eerie light. "We've been waiting for you, Tom," it crooned, the words dripping with malice. "The heart you've claimed is but a shade of the darkness you shall wear." Suddenly, he felt the barrier between him and the swirling shadows dissipate, as if he were woven into its fabric. Tendrils slipped through his fingers, cold and unforgiving, pulling him further into the depths of the forest. Thrumming pulses resonated with every forceful heartbeat, deeper than the organ he had just grasped, a hunger that demanded to be filled. "Embrace it," the cloaked figure urged, its eyes now locked onto Tom's. "Let go of your fear, and the forest will reveal its wonders." But deep down, fear bubbled, clawing at his insides, desperately clawing against the urge to yield. "Wonders," he whispered, teeth clenched. "What kind of wonders?" The shadows snickered, an echo that danced around him like a mocking wind. "The kind that offers power beyond your wildest dreams," it promised, voice sweeping through the space like a silky whisper. "Power that eats away at the boundaries of reality. And in return, it requires a sacrifice." Tom's thoughts raced, images of all he could achieve flickering through his mind. Control, strength, the ability to bend the world to his will. The heart pulsed energetically, feeding off his turmoil. Shadows lunged closer, caressing his skin, hungry to merge with his essence, threatening to consume him whole if he didn't act soon. Panic surged within him as a spiraling darkness beckoned, visions of his life flashing before his eyes. Friends, laughter, warmth. Everything he was on the verge of forsaking. The tree faces twisted, contorting into grotesque, mournful expressions once more, pleading silently for him to resist. Yet their cries were lost in the cacophony of chains rattling and laughter enveloping him, drowning him in temptation. In that moment, as despair clawed at his throat, a thought flickered, a flicker of rebellion against the shadows, a spark of defiance. "No," he shouted, trying to summon every ounce of strength he had left. The shadows faltered for a heartbeat, and Tom leaped forward. He felt raw energy coursing through his body, and with a desperate scream, he turned inwards, embracing the heart in his chest, channeling its light. Golden light erupted around him, casting away the darkness like a tidal wave, pushing the twisted figures back, their screams merging into one desperate wail that clawed at his sanity. The cloaked figure's grin faded into a grimace as it reeled away, shadows collapsing like a house of cards. But even as he fought, Tom could feel the struggle within. The shadows ripped through him, fangs bared, and he was thrust into a dreamlike state, floating through a void that pulsed with raw energy. Scenarios twisted around him: betrayal, loss, and regret. Cold tendrils wrapped tighter around his mind like a vice. Each squeezing thought chased an uneasy sense of dread. The hostile whispers grew, and amidst them all, a voice emerged commanding yet soothing, urging him deeper. "Let go, Tom. The darkness is an ally, not a foe. You've tasted its sweetness. Now indulge." Everything keeps driving him deeper into despair, visions swirling out of control. Dark figures emerge from the shadows, twisted versions of himself. Angry, vengeful, full of hatred. Teasing him, circling, whispering, "Why fight it? You belong here. We can give you everything if you merely obey. Join us," they echoed, their voices melding into a haunting symphony that felt disturbingly familiar. Each word carried a weight, a promise that curled around his mind like a tendril of smoke. Resolutely, Tom shook his head, but it felt like swimming against a tide of despair so thick and malevolent, it threatened to pull him under. Fleeting images danced around. Lost friendships, moments of helplessness, mistakes that kept replaying in endless loops like a broken record. And then, among the dark thoughts, a flicker of light burned through. Familiar laughter, heartfelt memories, daylight filtering through tree branches, warmth, joy. It pierced through the gloom, calling him home, grounding him even as the shadows pulled tighter. With a determined breath, he gathered the light, feeling it swell within him, even as darkness clawed and raged around him. "I am not afraid," he declared against the cacophony, and the shadows never ceased in their fight. He let the light burst forth, a wave of golden brilliance surging out, illuminating the faces pressed against the confines of his thoughts, forcing them into submission. But as it poured into the shadows, clawing them back, something else stirred. A low growl resonated from the depths, a more powerful presence wrapped in desperation. The cloaked figure's voice surged once more, twining through the air like a poison-laced vine. You cannot escape your destiny, Tom. The shadows are not just allies. They are your very essence. The landscape around him shifted, darkening, trees twisting unnaturally, and a thunderous crash erupted, shaking him forcefully as he stumbled to. Regain his balance. Fight or submit, the figure shrieked, as the shadows thrummed angrily, coiling around the very fabric of light he desperately wielded. Tom could feel their weight pressing heavily on every side, a twisted dance of power swirling, each movement threatening to drown him. In that moment of struggle, as he wrestled with the nature of his choices, the forest seemed to breathe, exhaling a chilling wind that carried the scent of decay, whispering dreadful secrets of what awaited if he faltered. Then, the heart hardened within him, pulsing with blinding vibrance, feeding off his determination. With one last flicker of resolve, Tom spun his light outward, letting it cascade before him in brilliant waves, illuminating the space around him with dazzling brilliance. And just like that, the shadows screamed, anguish mixing into the overwhelming energy as they splintered and recoiled. Faces twisted in torment sealed against their own fury, their shrieks merging into one wrathful call, splintering the air around him. A world reshaped, an understanding formed. He could wield the darkness, not be ruled by it. Suddenly, something shivered in the air, a shift. He felt the threads of reality warp, stretching and dawning. The shadows thinned before him. But in an instant, the cloaked figure lunged toward him with the swiftness of a predator, clawed hands reaching for him, fingers searching for purchase as if to snatch away the light. Tom's heart raced. He braced himself, channeling everything he had, light and darkness, into the fray. He threw his essence, battling against the chaos unfolding, desperately twisting the balance in his favor as he unleashed a burst of pure luminescence that shattered the very fabric of the night, illuminating a fractured reality in half light and shadow. The light exploded outward, blinding and bright, cascading like shards of glass across the darkened forest. For a moment, the trees stood marveled by the illumination, their twisted forms stripped of shadows. But that wonder was fleeting. As the light enveloped the cloaked figure, an agonized wail ripped through the stillness. It echoed like thunder, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. Dark tendrils recoiled from the brightness, hissing as they were forced to retreat, but the figure remained undeterred, teeth gritted, its grip on the shadows tightening. "You think you can banish me?" it screeched, voice a dreadful croak, lingering like mildew in forgotten corners. In that instant, the forest thrummed with a different energy, the trees whispering urgent warnings, their voices merging into a frantic chorus. Tom fought against the panic that threatened to rise within him. Suddenly, the earth trembled, branches snapped and cracked overhead, sending fragments tumbling down like rain. The ground buckled, revealing dark fissures that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly glow. A putrid stench wafted up from below, rich and choking, like rot emerging from the depths of a long-forgotten grave. He stumbled back, heart pounding in his chest, feeling the dread claw at his throat. Shadows pooled at the base of the trees, swirling, alive with their own hungry anticipation. The air thickened, almost liquid against his skin, suffocating him in an embrace far too tight. "You will all answer for your defiance," the figure bellowed, dropping its cloak to reveal a roiling mass of shadows that writhed around it, twisting into grotesque shapes, faces contorted in eternal pain. Each visage flickered out of existence, only to be replaced by another more horrifying than the last. An endless array of misery, each one a reminder of a soul consumed by darkness long ago. A piercing howl echoed in the distance, a sound that sent shivers racing down his spine. From the shadows emerged twisted forms, long-limbed creatures with skin like cracked porcelain. They slinked forward, their empty eyes glimmering with insatiable hunger, jagged mouths opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. The scent of decay intensified, intertwining with the air, threatening to choke him. Tom's instinct screamed at him to run, but the ground felt alive beneath him, pulling him deeper into its depths. The creatures slashed at the air, their clawed fingers twitching in anticipation, gnashing their teeth. The shadows danced around them, a furious whirlwind of malevolence that tightened the circle they formed, surrounding him in a dreadful ballet of hunger and darkness. "Embrace your fate," the cloaked figure hissed, its voice oozing with venomous delight. "You cannot escape it. It's always been yours." The surrounding trees seemed to bend closer, limbs intertwining as if to trap him in a cage of gnashing teeth and grasping roots. He finally did what he feared most. He let out a raw scream that felt like it came from somewhere deep within, trying to pierce through the layers of despair. In the sky above, the clouds convulsed, dark and ominous, swirling like a tempest ready to burst. The atmosphere crackled with energy, a storm brewing that mirrored the chaos encircling him. With determination crystallizing into fiery resolve, Tom anchored himself to the light within, pulling it from the depths of the night. The creatures flinched, their forms momentarily faltering at the glow. But their fear quickly turned to rage, their movements erratic as they lunged forward, driven by primal instinct. He didn't hesitate, unleashing another burst of radiant energy that surged from his core, scattering the creatures like leaves in a gale. They shrieked, a cacophony of jagged voices that twisted the very air, causing the trees to shudder in agony. Yet, even as the darkness writhed away momentarily, he could feel it pooling at the edges, tightening its grip. The figure was relentless, its laughter now echoing like the tolling of a macabre bell, each peal drawing him deeper into its sinister snare. "You mistake your power for light. You'll never be free," it taunted, and in its wake came the shadows, licking hungrily at his light, ready for revenge. Bleakness seeped back into the clearing, wrapping itself around him, clawing at his sanity. The glowing barriers he created felt like threads of silk, fraying under the pressure of the encroaching darkness. Tom stumbled back, heart racing, the shadows retreating only to morph and congeal behind him. Every breath felt labored as he threw everything he had left into the light, pushing his energy outward in desperate waves. The radiant force pulsated, and he envisioned it piercing through the very fabric of this dark world. But as the spray of light faded, the shadows surged forward, emboldened, feeling the surge of despair and embracing it like long-lost kin. With each pulse of darkness returning, the creature's gnashing grew louder, a fevered chorus that clawed at the edges of his mind. Tom felt them tugging at his consciousness, the silence of despair echoing in the background, taunting him with visions of giving in, letting go. "Join us, Tom," the voices begged, an alluring melody that wrapped around him like smoke, echoing memories that felt achingly familiar. Faint flashes of warmth, laughter now tinged with sorrow, and a sense of belonging that faded before his eyes. Ghostly figures emerged from the shadows, indistinct but so painfully relatable, beckoning him closer. His chest tightened as memories flickered before him, faces of those he lost swirling around, enticing him with promises of reunion, if only he would accept the dark embrace. A hollow ache pooled in his heart, threatening to drown him. Reality blurred as shadows danced with seductive grace, and every instinct within him screamed for escape. But even now, the truth whispered in his ear. This was a trap, a sinister game, one that swallowed souls like his until they were but echoes in the void. "No," he roared, forcing himself to fight, feeling the ground split underfoot as he twisted away from the air thick with despair. He could feel the shadows, feeling their cling, but he fought, channeling every ounce of light, fueled by desperation, by the need to break free from their grasp. With a determined shout, he surged forward, unleashing the brightness within. A blinding beacon rose against the encroaching night. The creatures shrieked, their forms splattering apart like fragile glass beneath the relentless wave of light, and a cacophony of howls splintered against the night, threatening to drown him whole. Tom advanced, breathless, feeling the last remnants of hope burst forth, pouring into the churning darkness like an unyielding river, flooding the shadows. But their lingering presence clawed at him, grasping for purchase from behind. The cloaked figure loomed closer, its eyes narrowing, burning with burning ire. "You think you can erase me? I shall drag you down into the depths of despair. You shall never escape." All at once, tendrils darted forward, wrapping around him with the speed and ferocity of a snake striking its prey. A sudden cold pierced through his veins as a searing pain shot through his arm, freezing him in place. Gritting his teeth, he willed himself to move, but the darkness bled further into his skin, pulling him deeper into a haze of torment, and he felt the last semblance of light begin to flicker, struggling under the weight of the shadows. Panic surged through him as he fought against the tide, a primal instinct igniting a fire within. He screamed into the void, echoing his determination, channeling all of his memories, all of the loves and joys he ever cherished. The forest shook violently, and a distant roar reverberated through the air, a sound not unlike the laughter of the dark figures, twisted and unhinged, the energy vibrating like a live wire anticipating release. In that moment, a shadow flashed behind him. He glanced back and saw a figure emerging from the depths, a familiar silhouette, shrouded in darkness yet awash in the warmth of home, lingering at the edge of his consciousness. It was there, his friend, his mentor, cloaked in shadows, but within the center glowed a soft light. "Fight," the figure urged, voice strong and unwavering. "You are not alone." A flicker of familiarity ignited within him, battling the encroaching darkness, matching it with the warmth of cherished memories. Laughter shared, dreams forged together. The shadows hissed, recoiling, but they twisted back towards him, more furious than before, furious and determined to snuff out the light. Desperate for liberation, Tom summoned every last pulse of luminosity, launching himself toward the source of warmth. The shadows pushed back, but Tom persisted, forcing the light to expand around him. "I will not yield," he declared as the space around him erupted in brilliance, flooding the forest with blinding clarity. The shadows writhed in fury, battling his resolve as the cloaked figure screeched in anger, and the very earth trembled beneath their fierce confrontation. But deep inside, he felt the warmth of his friend pulse stronger, harmonizing with his energy, creating a force unlike anything he had ever known, a composite of light and hope strong enough to engulf even the darkest specter of despair. As darkness clashed against light in a frenetic loop, Tom felt something shift within him, a dawning awareness. There, swirling in the chaos, lay the key to everything, the intertwining of shadow and hope, of despair and light. With renewed purpose, he gripped that knowledge, twisting it into form, gathering all he had. All he was, sharper than the edge of despair, and he hurled it back into the maelstrom as a shield of brilliance, forging forth through the darkness, unwavering. "You are not the master of me." The ground erupted beneath him, fracturing the very essence of reality. Echoes of laughter mingling with shrieks was a tempest of both dread and defiance. The cloaked figure faltered, the creatures recoiled, their forms splintering against the pure force of his unwavering light. Tom surged forward, breaking free and fully embracing the power of his spirit entwined with that of his lost friend, igniting both shadow and light into a whirlwind of energy that cascaded through the air, drowning out all noise. Amidst the chaos, he saw the cloak disintegrate into the mass of darkness, revealing a myriad of faces twisted in rage, desperation, and sorrow, reaching toward him, begging to pull him down into the abyss. Yet something incredible took place. The very darkness that had felt so heavy began to disperse, torn apart by Tom's unyielding spirit, unraveling into a storm that flowed away like black smoke before the dawn, chased into the depths of the forest's heart. But as shadows dimmed and the oppressive weight began lifting, a sense of eerie calm settled in. He stood amidst the fading echoes, an uneasy silence resonating through the trees, as strands of light filled the clearing. Yet beneath that light, a whisper lingered, a promise that the darkness would return, that it would always seek to reclaim what it had lost. And in that moment, part of him knew this was not the end. It was a slow march towards an even greater confrontation. But for now, at least, he had prevailed. Silence enveloped the clearing, but the shadows clung stubbornly to the edges of the trees, swirling dully like smoke in the aftermath of a wildfire. The air was thick, almost cloying. Tom could feel it pressing in, a suffocating reminder that the darkness wasn't gone, merely biding its time. He took a few tentative steps, heart racing as uncanny silence wrapped around him. Each sound amplified until he could hear his own breath quicken and the thud of his heartbeat reverberating in his ears. The forest felt too alive, too aware, as though it had absorbed the chaos, the fear, and now watched him with 1,000 unseen eyes. The moment felt surreal, like standing on the threshold between two worlds. The light still pulsed around him, a soft glow that flickered like a dying star, casting long shadows that danced with a life of their own. Yet, in the corners, darkness pooled, deep, inky blackness that seemed to reach out, grasping for something to draw into its depths. A shiver crept down Tom's spine as he turned, the sensation of being watched sharpening his senses. Suddenly, memories played tricks on him, flickering images of the creatures he had fought, their twisted faces now merging with the darkness, teasing him with memories of his failures. Then came the whispers, low and guttural, slithering through the cracks of reality. They were familiar, echoing the anxious thoughts that had plagued him during the battle, voices that knew his fears all too well. "You're never alone. You won't escape." Each word wrapped around him, pulling tighter, creating a web of worry and dread, making him doubt the reality he fought to reclaim. Shadows slithered across the ground, and Tom sensed movement behind him, as if the very darkness he had battled was now coiling back, eager to sink its fangs into his spirit. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flash, a fleeting glimpse of movement. Something darted from behind a tree, a glimmer of white in an otherwise pitch-black world. Instinctively, he turned, and there, standing just beyond the reach of the weak light, was a figure clad in shadows, its features obscured and warped, almost human but not quite, the edges of the form shifting like quicksand. It reached out, a skeletal hand forming from the darkness, and with a silent scream, Tom stumbled back, heart hammering as he fought to breathe, the air now heavy with a pungent darkness that clawed its way into his lungs. The forest began to shift around him, trees bending and twisting unnaturally, their bark cracking with low, mournful groans. The air turned cold, biting into his skin, awakening an instinctual fear that screamed for him to run. But he was paralyzed by the sight before him. The darkness churned, forming shapes that twisted and gnawed at sanity, whispering secrets that seeped into his mind, promises of despair that rustled through the leaves. Each second felt like an eternity in this engulfing void where light struggled against the suffocating darkness, creating a grotesque dance of hope and anguish. As he staggered backward, the figure stepped forward, revealing a face that was all too familiar, a visage etched in pain, hollow eyes like bottomless pits. It was a haunting reflection of his past, a loss that never truly left him. "Join us," it rasped, voice echoing like nails on glass, the sound scraping at his sanity. Shadows reached out, swirling, their cold fingers brushing against his skin in a way that felt both familiar and abhorrent, tugging at his emotions, offering solace that turned sickeningly sweet. Tom could almost feel the tendrils of despair wrapping around his heart, ready to crush what's left of his will. In that moment, the air grew denser, charged with a tangible darkness that pulsed, as if breathing alongside him. The trees began to whisper, their voices merging into a haunting symphony that echoed off the bark. Tom's gaze darted, searching, desperate for a spark, a sign that the light would return. Yet the whispers turned into a deafening roar, drowning out his thoughts, urging him to surrender, to give in to the despair that had haunted him all along. "You don't have to fight," they hissed, the shadows swirling faster, growing thicker, wrapping tighter around his limbs until he could barely move. Fear gripped him as the environment morphed into a surreal nightmare, the colors dimming, shifting into a palette of grays and blacks. Moments bled into each other. His perception warped until time lost all meaning. Every heartbeat echoed in the stillness, a countdown to his own potential demise. Yet, deep within, a flicker of resistance ignited. Tom focused on the glimmer of light he still possessed, willing it to shine brighter against the growing tide of shadows engulfing him. But as he fought back, reality began to splinter. The shadows whispered of forgotten things, of bitter losses and long-lost friendships that had faded away. Dark memories invaded his mind, haunting him with visions of each person he'd lost, their faces morphing from smiles to grotesque visages of despair, twisting into a horrific collage that preyed on his heart. "You are nothing without us," they echoed, every syllable laced with an eerie cadence that threatened to shatter his resolve once and for all. As he steadied his breath, the world around him contorted again. The ground trembled, and it cracked beneath him, revealing a gaping maw that seemed to lead into the very essence of the darkness itself. He could feel its pull. It wanted him to fall in, to embrace the creeping void that offered a sense of twisted comfort. But resolute, Tom ignited the core of his spirit, drenching the surroundings in luminous light, boiling with a ferocity that lit the forest ablaze. Yet, even as he fought, the looming figure engulfed him in shadowy tendrils, draining strength from his soul as it laughed, a sound so hollow it echoed through his mind like a death knell. "You cannot escape what you are," it sneered, the darkness wrapping tighter, bending reality to its will. Heart pounding, Tom felt every ounce of his being drawn toward the swirling abyss beneath him, visions of despair and longing surging with calculated cruelty. But in that exact moment, a sudden spark of clarity broke through the stagnant darkness as he remembered the unity of those he loved, pulling on that warmth like a lifeline. Drawing upon the strength of connection that the shadows sought to destroy, he let out a primal scream, pouring every ounce of light he could muster into the fray, ripping apart the fabric of the night around him. The shadows recoiled, screeching as their forms disintegrated into ash, carried off by a gust of wind that whipped through the trees like a wall of agony. With one final surge, Tom propelled himself toward that fissure of dark, gaining momentum as he felt the very essence of his spirit intertwining with every lost memory, becoming a tapestry of undying light and love. With a blinding flash, reality shattered like glass, and in one final, cataclysmic explosion, the forest erupted in brilliance, illuminating the nightmares just long enough to reduce them to mere echoes in the vastness of night. The darkness shrieked a sound that resonated throughout the realm and sent tremors through the stillness. As the echoes faded and the light held dominion, Tom found himself alone in the tranquil aftermath, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves, whispering reassurance. But even with the victory at hand, an unsettling feeling lingered, coiling in his gut like a snake, reminding him that balance hung by a thread, that the battle against the shadows was ongoing, a dreadful truth lurking beneath the surface. Uncertainty remained a cold reminder that peace was never permanent in this symphony of light and dark, a haunting melody that played on every time the wind shifted among the still trees. This knowledge would forever remain with him, a shadow left unshaken, an echo of a more malevolent threat looming over the horizon, just waiting for the moment to strike again.